welcome to the Thinking Tackle podcast. Now, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today I have the very great privilege of being joined in the studio by a man who is equally at home fishing for barbel on his local river as he is fishing for golden mahseer in India, and indeed carp in the Colne Valley. Gary Newman, thank you very much for coming.
Great to be here.
In fact, thank you very much for crossing the corridor and going, because
it's not a long way.
Yeah, because you do actually work for Korda, right?
I do, yes.
And you have, and we're going to come on to this in a bit, you have one of the craziest jobs in carp fishing. Can you just explain to us quickly what it is you do for a living?
Well, official title's TV production manager, so it's basically organising all the Monster Carp shoots. So it's sort of choosing venues, obviously along with Tom Dove and Neil Spooner between us, and then arranging everything, sometimes going for a recce trip just to see if they're suitable for filming on, and yeah, going from there really.
I think we've got Dovey and Spooner banging on the ceiling, I think, so trying to remind you not to give too much away, but there's a little bit of work going on, so if you do hear the odd bang, we can't do anything about it.
No, it's a busy time of year.
I think what really fascinates me about the job that you've got now is that yes, you organise the locations, but this means going and test fishing. I mean, it sounds like the dream job.
Oh, so, not always, but in terms of the fishing side, but sometimes get to go and test venues just to see. I mean, for filming, obviously, we need to be catching fish, and it's not just about the fishing. It's got to be suitable for filming as well. Which, well, just talking about the noise there, things like that come into it. I mean, obviously rules, whether you can film within the rules of the venue you're going to. It's logistically a massive project. The amount of equipment we have with us. I mean, if you've got a day only venue, you can't be packing up at the end of every day, setting up again the following day. It's just not practical with the amount of like the size of our team. So yeah, really just seeing how suitable the places are for what we need.
Is this not to put too fine a point on it, is this because these shoots cost so much money that there can be nothing left to chance once their guys are out there?
Oh, very much so. I mean, we've got a team of normally around 10 to 12 people, some of those being freelance TV cameramen, which obviously don't come cheap, sort of director, sound man. So yeah, you really need to know that you're going to get something out of it. I mean, you don't have to go there and catch hundreds of fish. I mean, for filming purposes, even 4 or 5 fish is enough. But I mean, if you go somewhere completely blank, don't get a film out of it, it's obviously cost a lot of money to do that.
I mean, do you ever sort of have a moment of reflection and think, how did I get to the point where, you know, effectively I'm getting paid to go abroad and pioneer venues and establish contact with local anglers and do all these things that on the surface might seem quite glamorous? Oh,
very much so, yeah. I mean, it's something I never really thought I'd be doing. I mean, in fact, something my dad's an angler. He always told me I'd never make a living out of fishing. So I sort of proved him wrong on that point. But just incredibly lucky though to have sort of got where I am today.
What kind of report do you have to file for these things? Like, because obviously you're gone for weeks at a time, and you often this encompass several venues. Would you have been in on initial meetings when the concept for each show is formulated, and then you try and fit venues to that? Is that how it works? Or
yeah, we normally have a plan. I mean, we sit down obviously with Tom and Neil, who are going to be fishing the venue. I mean, the venues very much come down to where they want to fish as well. You always get the best out of them when they're on a lake that they actually want to be on,
which is all fine, but they don't have your knowledge of global venues, do they? Surely not many do.
No. I mean, between us, we sort of sort things out in terms of the venue. I mean, sometimes they've got venues that they want to go to, or Neil. I mean, Neil for a lot of the European sales team and that, he hears about places as well. But again, sometimes you hear about the fishing side, but you don't know much about the logistics again, or how suitable they are for filming. Even silly things like we said before, noise. You could turn up, there's a factory next door, and it sounds complete write-off for a week.
So are the guys, when you're out there, are they on the phone to you? How's it looking, Gal? Like, what have you found?
It varies. Depends where I'm going. Sometimes they just let me sort of get on with it, and then we'll have a sort of sit down when I get back, sort of talk through the venues I've been to. I mean, there was one, I was in Hungary last autumn. Venue was great, caught loads of fish, but it turns out it might even be too prolific for what we need, and too difficult to get through to the bigger fish. I mean, there's some massive fish in this lake. I mean, it's a big wild.
Is this the one? Did you include a picture in your? Is that the?
I
the
did.
49
Yeah,
common
the 49 common there when I
Go on,
was.
Tobe, see if you can find that.
Yeah, I'm on it.
So that one in particular, let's take that as an instance. So this was a list of potentials, was it? And you thought, right, I'm going to go. Do you have to sort of plan around the venues, or do you try and do what? Do you do one per trip? How does it work?
It depends. I mean, that was actually tying in. I was doing some filming for a Guru show out in Croatia. We were filming out there. I was helping with that project, and Hungary is pretty much on the way, so it made sense to stop off and have a look at this venue on the way down to Croatia. Then once I'd finished filming there, I was driving all the way back through France, so it gave a good opportunity to sort of look at a couple of the French venues that we're planning on or looking at potentially filming on. So it's trying to make the most of your time, really.
Well, absolutely, but like I say, it could seem like you were left to your own devices. You must feel a little bit like you're quite detached from the team as such. You're fishing on your own a lot of the time abroad with no one saying, Gary, what you doing today? Like you're literally fishing, trying to work out the scope of these venues for future potential. I mean, do you find being on your own and sort of working through stuff like that quite easy?
Yes, I mean I've traveled over the years. I've travelled so much and quite often on my own. It's and fishing as well. I mean, a lot of the fishing I've done in the past is sort of on my own. So it's not something that really daunts me. If you turn up from somewhere, I don't know, sort of 1,000 acres.
Forgive me if that's the wrong way. Is that right?
That's the right one. Yes.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
That's definitely that's in the folder as well.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
Yes,
Oh,
I think it's in the overseas folder. Yeah.
Okay, we'll get that a bit.
Yeah.
But look at that. I mean, typical of the Hungarian fish, Gary, that one?
That's quite different. I mean, a lot of them out there are quite plain sort of mirrors, great big humpy backs on them. But this particular lake, it's actually got some really nice fish, nice variety in there.
Yeah.
There's a common in there that goes around the sort of 38 to 40 kilo mark as well. So it'd be bigger than any common we've ever caught on Monster Carp before. But the problem there was I think I'd 100 carp in 7 or 8 days fishing.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah,
lovely yellowy scales to it, and a huge shoulder. Like,
yeah, I mean it's really clear water as well. There, it's just it's a big gravel pit. So it's really up and down.
How much research do you have to do before you go out to these places?
I mean, this one we've got one of our local team anglers, Hungarian guy who fishes it. He lives pretty much on the bank of it. He mainly fishes one end from his back garden, but we at least had some info. And again, knew there was some good fish in there. So it was just seeing whether, because we've had it before. I mean, when they fish Balaton, I think that was in series 1 of Monster Carp. They caught lots of fish, but a lot of small fish. And out in Hungary, I mean, the mouths on a lot of it, you get like a 20 pounder, the mouth on it. You can put a couple of 30mm baits on, you're not getting away from them. It tends to just make your rigs less effective.
So do you agree on the way that you're going to try tactically with the guys, or do you tend to report back afterwards in terms of what you've tried and what it's produced?
Yeah, I mean, the venues I've fished, I mean, sometimes I don't even go and fish them. It's just sort of speaking to some of the local anglers, again, like our team anglers or France. I've got friends out there, like some of the French anglers who fish a lot of these big waters. But then coming back to Tom and Neil, sort of reporting back what I've found out. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how they want to fish it, because we've been to venues before where there's supposedly a going method and way of catching them. They've done something different and caught loads more. Or you got the other extreme, like when we went to Texas, they wanted to fish sort of spinner rigs and more carp style for those buffaloes. Didn't work. And what did work in the end was fishing method feeders,
the pack baits,
yeah, which is what the locals sort of fish.
Find us a buffalo carp, Tobes, in Gary's, because these are. I mean, I remember being a kid, seeing these in Carp Talk occasionally. They seem to sort of cross the divide, because they look a bit like a carp, don't they? I mean,
they're not even a carp.
Are they not?
They're a minnow, I think.
Are they really?
Yeah, they actually come under minnow
ridiculous.
family. Obviously, some derivative of
Talk to me
minnows,
about what they like to fish for, and what are their sort of behaviours like.
I think they just come in packs and feed. You seem to get sort of.
But they're huge, right? I mean, how big do they go?
They go, I think, I'm not sure what they reckon, sort of 70 odd pound, I think, is, certainly that sort of size.
But they look so remarkably like our fish, but
they look like a carp.
Yeah.
You would swear they're a carp to look at.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, the mouth's slightly different on them.
Sort of
I
really,
think their
really
filter
sort of-
feeders
right.
a lot more.
Hence
The pack baits working
Yeah.
so well for them, sort of little balanced hook baits. And
Now, this is, I guess, the question that springs to mind, having looked through the folder of stuff you sent, inside of which is this picture of you with the buffalo carp. Presume you weren't going to let the opportunity pass you by to have a go for these fish.
no, that was right at the end of the shoot. They were doing some closing interviews, and there was an opportunity to have a go. So I just quickly tied a rig up, borrowed a rod off one of the guys, chucked it out there. It was on top of their baited area where they'd been fishing, and it rattled off, and it turned out to be the second biggest one of the shoot.
Really?
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah.
I mean, as an angler, are you sort of are you champing at the bit the whole shoot long, thinking, I'd love to have a go at this?
Some of the venues definitely, but it's one of those things you sort of get used to it. It's a job, and you're there not to fish, but to do other. I mean, occasionally.
Here we go.
Oh, there you go.
So,
Yeah.
Gary, for those listening, can you describe what that fish looks like?
I'll say it's very. I mean, you'd think that's a carp to look at, wouldn't you? I mean,
Absolutely.
It's very much until you get to the sort of
Is
head
it
end,
silvery?
mouth
I mean,
end. They're
I'm
quite
terrible with
silvery.
colours, but-
Yeah, they are quite silvery looking. They got like darker sort of tinge.
Like
to
they're
them.
missing. They're a bit like our glass carp can look a bit like that. The pigment's different, isn't it?
Yeah, they've definitely got different pigmentation. I mean, the mouths are different on them. Again, you can see they are
No barbules by the look of it.
No barbules. I think out there they call them a sucker fish. They're like the species,
Yeah.
as well.
How are they regarded out there?
You've actually got a few of them now who fish for carp. There is a
Yeah. But
American
these guys,
carp
what about these?
group.
What about the buffaloes?
Well, they target those as well.
Do they?
I mean, you have got normal carp in there, like our king carp, but only small. In fact, I think Neil had a 17-pound one old when we were filming,
Right.
which turned out to be a
Late
it was a
record or
It was a
something.
late record.
Was it?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I remember Tom caught a late record. They said it was over the late record, and Neil beat it about an hour later, or
Oh,
whichever way
yeah.
around it was.
I
Yeah.
don't suppose he let him know about that either.
Oh no,
so-
no, they definitely didn't mention that at all when when he beat it.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. It's an impressive fish, and this is something that we're going to talk about, albeit later on in the podcast, Gary. And that is your globe-trotting antics, fishing for pretty much anything that's impressive and swims. You know, you've done an awful lot. You're probably, I'm going to guess, there can't be more than 10 people in the UK who've done the fishing that you've done.
It's very small number that go and do. Yeah, so much variety. Because it's mainly freshwater stuff as well. I mean, I do the odd bit of sea fishing abroad. Whereas a lot of the people I know travel for the sea fishing, like marlin fishing or whatever. But
Yeah.
I'm terrible on boats. I get badly seasick, so I try and avoid those. Well, I'll do the odd trip, but yeah, they're not ideal.
I'm just going to apologise in advance, Rich, and I won't do this too much. I did it a little bit in the Guru one, but I can't help it because Gary's just got a mad selection of things that he's caught, and I'm just going to throw this up because I've stumbled across it. But that sums up, I think, Gary's fishing quite well, actually, where he literally will catch anything that's impressive.
That was in Texas as well.
Yeah, it
so
was.
It does tie in quite well. Alligator
but
gar.
What's a mad thing to have, like, look at it.
I mean, it's a lot bigger than you, isn't it, that?
Yeah,
I know perspective's a wonderful thing, but
6'10",
yeah. Yeah, probably around the 200-pound mark.
But sorry to have jumped in, but
Not at
Gal,
all.
what is it like to, because most people listening, I can't imagine, have caught something like that. What is it like playing, landing, and just dealing with, something like that? I mean, to me, it just looks like prehistoric.
Yeah, I mean, they're quite daunting because you're not used to... I mean, they've got... You can't see in that picture, but the teeth on them, you definitely don't want to get bitten by something like that.
Imagine.
I mean, I was fishing with a local friend who's used to catching them, but yeah, if I wasn't, then the first time you get one, you'd be thinking, what on earth do I do here?
Was it quite docile in that environment there on the bank?
They are when you get them on the bank, yeah.
Because you don't want that snapping around, do you? Surely.
That is the worry when they're on you. If they start flapping...
You've got it literally on top of you. Like, I'm not
yeah,
sure I'd be able
you
to
can
do
see I've
that.
almost got my head to trying to avoid
the jaws.
because the teeth on them. Yeah, if you got caught by one of those teeth, it'd do a lot of damage. And even the scales, they've got like sharp edges to them.
Really?
So you get them rub against you, they cut you.
I think for those people listening, I think most people will have seen an arapaima. We're talking similar scale, aren't we? But different technology up front there that's got a head like an alligator.
I mean, they are. The head is like an alligator. I mean, they're prehistoric. I think they've been around for tens of millions of years, unchanged. They're one of those fish species that has been.
Do you find that this stuff hasn't spoilt you? Because obviously you this winter you've been fishing for barbel on your local River Colne, for instance.
Yeah.
How do you motivate yourself to go back to what is quite mundane in comparison to some of the fish we're going to look at in due course?
It's sort of all relative. I mean, I just love going fishing and catching fish. I mean, quite often I come back from a few days ago, I flew back in from Suriname. It's like 35 degrees. And last weekend I was out pike fishing just a couple of days later, just because, again, wanted to get out and make the most of it before the season ends. So I can always get motivated. There's always something to go and fish for. And it's all relative to where you are.
Mm-hmm. But I mean, for you grew up in Buckinghamshire.
Yep.
What kind of fishing was important to you as you sort of made your first steps?
I mean, I started off just fishing on the local canal, fishing for it, sort of anything that came along. Joined a little club water, must have been when I was about 11 years old. Again, fish, just general, catching little perch, roach, whatever would take a float fish maggot. But also carp in this lake. Used to watch them cruising about on sort of hot sunny days. Tried to catch them unsuccessfully, and that's sort of what got me interested in carp. Started sort of reading books on it.
And hey ho, you actually happened to be, a short journey away from the hotbed of carp fishing at that time.
Yeah, sort of right in the middle of it. I mean, I had the Colne Valley in one direction. I mean, I actually started on Tring Reservoirs, which was sort of 7-8 miles from my house. It was easy to get a lift there.
Very, very famous at its time for the tench and stuff.
Again, yeah, really famous for that. You had people like Alan Wilson fishing there at the time. But there was carp in there as well. I mean, catching carp, sort of started night fishing, all that sort of side of it. Again, sort of like 12, 13, used to get... Oh, there we go.
So that's a Tring shot.
Yeah, that's of miles worth. I think they're probably around sort of double figures, those two fish, which were, for me at the time, were quite big. But that had been when I was sort of, was that 92, so 16 years old, yeah.
I mean, a couple of commons. Would you say mid-double, did you say?
I think they were low double, probably
doubles.
scrape a double with that, yeah.
Yeah, bit of an unhooking mat going on, which is good for the day.
Yeah, one of the old original ones, yeah.
What was the scene like up at Tring? Because obviously it is a venue that had attracted specimen anglers from all over the country and still attracts carp anglers to this day, isn't it? They're magnificent waters, actually, aren't they?
I mean, there were quite a fean carp anglers, especially on Marsworth at the time. There was a few sort of
always been the
fishings.
highest stock of the...
Yeah, it's always had a good stock. Never did any big fish. I mean, when I was fishing it, I don't even think I ever heard of a 20 coming out. But then you had Startops next door, which always had some bigger ones. I remember a guy when I was a kid catching a 29-pound common, which at the time was huge. And seeing that on the bank.
I mean, I've walked that myself. I used to live not too far away in Bedfordshire, and cool lakes. Love those lakes. You know, the clear water of Startops, and you've got the vast area of shallows at the top end as well, haven't you? And I think a lot of those sort of British waterways fish that ended up in there, probably from the canal over the years, have done quite well, I think, haven't they?
They have, yeah. I mean, Startops did them to, I think, sort of mid-40s, certainly. That sort
bigger,
of size.
yeah.
Upper 40s maybe,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, I know there were some good ones in there. It was a great water to learn on as well. I mean, sort of boat fishing. I mean, we're going out, all right, not proper
weird
boats,
that you were allowed to use boats on
seaside
there.
dinghies, like when I was a kid, like paddling out, dropping baits, finding clear areas, fishing Startops.
Have you caught Startops carp?
I haven't, no, I had to go on there.
It's a shame, because I mean, I don't even know what they looked like back then, but I remember being told it's like an egg box, Gary. Is that...
It was up and down all over, full of weed, sort of bars, little humps, and it was an interesting place.
Did you find that because obviously you went, for those that don't know or haven't followed your fishing, you went on and have done and still do fish for specimen fish of all species in this country.
Yep.
To say nothing of what you've done abroad, but did the Alan Wilsons of this world, did that lifestyle look seductive to you? The long stay, the hardcore specimen hunting that was going on at Startops?
Yeah, it certainly interested me. I mean, I was mainly into carp fishing then, plus obviously, saying that winters always pike fished. I mean, you got to sort of end of October. I mean, back then it was always thought carp didn't really feed in the winter. We certainly never used to catch many, so you get the pike rods out. But the other species as well, I mean, there was big perch in there at the time, big bream, tench, roach. I mean, I did have a go for some of the other species, but that sort of probably the earliest sort of specimen fishing
I mean,
I would have done.
when you put it like that, it is remarkable what those reservoirs did in terms of specimens, isn't it? Remarkable.
Oh, they did,
Range of
did big
species.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah.
there
Crazy.
wasn't much in there that they didn't do. Yeah.
So your Milesworth was your sort of training.
Yeah,
in
sort of
big
between
carp
there
fishing.
and Stanborough Lake, which is again a lot
Very
of people
famous,
sort of famous
like
again.
Runswater, if you like, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah, it was always sort of a bit of a winter water for people, but
I
we
mean-
fished it in the summer as kids.
Yeah, did good fish as well. I think there were 20s, weren't there, back then?
Yeah, there was a chance. I never had a 20 out there, but there was a chance. Yeah, I think I had them to 18-pounder, but there was a chance of a 20.
Yeah.
There was enough fish in there that you could go and have a chance of catching.
Was it all about
days only?
Was it all about the cafe end back then? Even then,
A lot of it was. I mean, we used to catch them on floaters, and they had lots of silly rules on there as well. That floater fishing, you weren't allowed to loose feed floaters.
right?
It was classed as serial ground bait, I remember, which is
Yeah.
a very weird one.
Most
And-
people won't. Most lads who've come to it in more recent times will never have had to put up with the match style rules that we had to
No.
put up with. Clubs
Yeah.
invariably enforced down the years.
Oh, they had some really strange ones.
I mean,
yeah,
they
yeah.
hated boilies, didn't they?
They
Let's
hated
face it.
boilies. You weren't allowed to loose feed, but stringers only. I think even stringers technically were banned, but they'd let you get away with them.
Yeah,
No spodding or anything like that.
I feel like you chucked us a picture of a Stanborough fish in there.
I think there is.
There's one,
yeah.
isn't there?
Yeah, I think there was one from like
Quite-
early days.
From memory, were they always those sort of round, scaleless looking, fairly pale, chunky
there's
ones?
quite a
Oh, you've
few.
got a scaly
that's
one
a
there.
scaly one there. No, a lot of them weren't like that though. Yeah. That's just a foam picture of a print, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it barely looks like you, mate. That so long ago.
I'd have been about 13, 14
Lovely,
now, I think. Yeah.
lovely. I mean, do you know where they came from? Those fish?
I'm not actually sure because there was
it's
a
a
lake,
park
there was a
lake,
boat,
isn't it? So,
park
yeah.
lake. There was a boat in lake next door, which was absolutely there's no fishing on there, but that was absolutely stuffed full of them. So I assume they always moved a few across.
Yeah.
But even the river there had a little bit of the lake.
Still
had some
does, I
decent-
think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
had some good carp in it.
Yeah. So how soon did you? Let's get on to the juicy stuff. How soon did you move down into the Colne Valley? And for context, what year would it have been when you started looking around that?
I reckon
Area.
probably around 91, maybe 92. I'd have been about 15, 16.
So literally in the your mailings were there and fishing.
Yeah, they'd have been up the other. Yeah, I mean, I was fishing sort of Rickmansworth Aquadrome,
Yeah.
sort of Batchworth Lake and Berry Lake next door to it, and they'd have been fishing. Yeah, obviously your likes of sort of Harefield and Savay
Yeah.
were sort of really well known in those days.
But
Yeah.
were you must have been. I mean, you were a well-read guy. You must have been aware that this was going on in that area. And
Oh, very much, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, used to get all the books and that, like all the mailing ones, sort of read avidly. Sort of,
did they have an influence on you actually turning up in that part of the world, or was it inevitable that you have to go there?
It was more because of where I lived, and the fact there was fishing clubs there as well. So I joined. It had been Watford Piscators at the time, which was sort of one I could afford to join, and had quite a few different waters, including the Aquadrome. So
Yeah.
it sort of made sense to join a club.
A crazy venue. I've walked around the Aquadrome with Nick Hellier, and that's the one with the sheets of asbestos in it?
That's
Is that
it.
right?
Yes. Yeah. I think they drained it during the war to stop them using it as sort of a sighting coming
really?
into London. Because
Yeah.
obviously a lot of those pits weren't there back in those days.
Uh-huh.
They were dug
Is
for
that one of the older ones? Then?
That's one of the old ones, yeah.
Yeah.
And apparently it got dumped. Don't know how true it is. Always been told, but it got dumped in there during the war when it was drained down, and then it just filled back
Sounds
up with
terrible,
water.
but the carp did quite well.
Yeah, I think with asbestos, it's only dangerous when it gets into powder form in the air. I think when it's in sheets like that, you could,
I mean, you're
handle
fishing
it,
onto this
doesn't it?
stuff, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You can,
I could just imagine your legs punching through these sheets of asbestos.
yeah, combination lead and asbestos. Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful.
But it was a lake, the Aquadrome, that kicked a lot of anglers off. The likes of Nick, was there as a youngster, wasn't he? As well,
Yeah,
it must have been
where I met Nick.
Was
Yeah,
it?
would have been. Yeah, him and Danny Smith and a few of the others sort of.
Yeah, so
fished
all the
with
similar,
back then.
all your same sort of age.
Yeah, a couple of years older, I
Yeah,
think Nick
so-
and Dan were. Yeah.
So
But similar, yeah. We all sort of fished together.
I can imagine. I feel like Nick and Dan were probably more streetwise at that point, Gary. If you're coming down from leafy Chesham down into,
Probably would have been back then. Yes.
was there a gap in experience, or were you all doing a similar? Were you learning together, or had they been doing it?
They'd been doing it for longer.
Yeah.
I mean, they were driving as what they would definitely have been 2 or 3 years older because they were sort of driving at the time. But yeah, Nick used to come and sort of pick me up and that, and you never quite knew where you were going to end up when you went off fishing somewhere. And how easy access to the venue would be.
The lesser the better, I guess.
How many fences in there?
Yeah.
You know what it's like, yeah.
Well,
but as kids, you just went fishing.
Absolutely. Fond memories of those times?
Oh, very much so, yeah. No, we had some great times.
And is it fair to say at that point you're a carp angler?
Yeah, I'd have said, I mean, that's mainly what I fished for at the time. That was main sort of interest, sort of books and all the magazines and everything would have been carp orientated.
And what was the fishing like on the aquadrome at that time, and the berry even? Yeah,
I mean, it was again going from fishing tring where it was just sort of mainly boating rigs out. I mean, on the aquadrome, although it's open water, quite a lot of it was fishing around the islands. So it was sort of learning, sort of casting under trees. I mean, that was back in the day before wraps and clipping up. And or if you did clip up, you'd cast, clip up and edge a bit closer. But it was certainly before you had wraps and all that. And so, definitely a learning curve and probably expensive one as well with lids and rigs.
Was it one of those lakes where the tighter you got, the quicker the bite?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, there were certain spots. If you get it in under the island, you'd get a bite very quickly. If you were sort of a bit off, you could.
And was that singles by nature or by necessity, or were you able to get a bit of bait round? You
get a few round it with a throwing stick or even catapult on some of the sort of shorter range stuff. But it didn't seem to matter if you could get a bait in right in under. It feels like that lake is, from memory, is sort of almost broken in half by an island or a chain of islands. Is that right? You've got 2 islands. Yeah, it's almost a bay at each end, a middle bit, and the sort of islands go all the way, almost right the way across.
Famous water, it's fair to say.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's done carp to over £40. I think they grew onto. So it's it's one a lot of people started on as well that I know who fish around that area. So it's
quite public as well. It's not exactly, by Con Valley standards, it's not idyllic, is it?
No, definitely not. You had dog walkers around there, dogs jumping in your water ski boat as well on there. Yeah. Nights, it always had, I never had any trouble down there, but it always had a reputation for being a little bit dodgy at night, or it could be. Sort of people hanging around. But it was, it's basically a park lake. Yeah.
And you're getting dropped off down there, effectively, in the middle of a park lake and... thriving by the sound of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was back in the days before mobile phones. You get dropped off sort of on a Friday night after school or whatever, picked up again on a Sunday. So,
And how often were you catching?
I probably caught. I mean, got to the stage where you're catching most sessions. You'd sort of once you'd sort of sussed out sort of what you're doing a bit. And got used to the fishing.
And this was nearly always pinging tight. I presume those swims used to go quite early. On a weekend.
Yeah, it didn't used to get that busy back then. I mean, caught some fishing open water as well. You had sort of a lot of sort of boys on there, which from the water ski boats, and you could see them bobbing up and down where the carp were feeding around the ropes.
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Amazing. So you would try and target those when that was happening, or would you sort of lay a trap for them, knowing that they were likely to use those areas?
Yeah, I mean, there were certain spots around the buoys where they used to get to. I mean, although I started off fishing the islands, that sort of grew into sort of fishing open water as well eventually. I had some good catches in open water. You lost a lot less fish as well. Yes. And
were these 20-pounders?
No, I did eventually get a couple of 20s out there, but a few years after I sort of started fishing You're fishing for sort of like doubles. They were bigger than what I was catching at Tring. But I mean, the first 20 I had was out of Berry Lake, actually.
Really? I think we've got a picture, Tobes, of certainly one from the Aki, haven't we? You did chuck one of those in as well.
Yeah, I think there was a 20. Yeah, there would have been a scrape of 20, I think I put a picture in of. Yeah.
And what sort of like rigs and baits, and were you influenced by what Nick and Danny were doing on that front, or were it something you were doing, you ploughing your own furrow, so to speak, with that, with tackers?
Probably more through sort of the magazines and some of that. Yeah, I mean, quite basic, sort of just knot this knot style hair rig, or it wouldn't even been knot this knot back then. I think it was using
swimmer rigs,
Maruta Kinryus, yeah, whipping knot, and then dom off whipping knot, and then tying a hair in the tag end.
Sorry, we look at the first 20 from Berry, is it?
Well, you could do either, actually, because you just, now we've mentioned the Berry, you could pop that.
I've got that one.
But you've got the Aquadrome as well, which are both quite famous waters, despite never having really So that's the berry, right?
That's the
berry
berry.
one.
That was
what,
20.
what an absolute chunk.
Yeah, really fat one. That was
Yeah.
26 pound 2 ounces.
It's as deep as it is long.
Yeah,
It's fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah,
is
think
that
it's carrying a bit of spawn, that one?
is that
Although saying that was later on in the year, so maybe not.
is that typical of the fish in those two lakes at the time?
Yeah, I think that would have been probably sort of an older fish at the time. I mean, berry did get. I mean, it did go on to do 40 pounders, but I think some of the fish from the aquadrome were moved across over the years.
Yeah.
They always sort of, you had sort of fish kill. You get a fish kill on berry, which happened sort of a few years after that, and they lost most of the stock, and then I think it got stocked from the aquadrome. And those
I seem
fish
to remember
grew big.
some story, not naming any names, but it was written, wasn't it, about carp being wrapped up in holdalls and taken down the road and put.
Yeah, I mean, it was literally next door, so
Yeah.
yeah, it wouldn't surprise me if yeah.
if they were stocked in that fashion. Would that have been sort of an Italian mirror? Because obviously the valley was famous for those.
I think
wasn't
that I mean, it looks certainly got that look to it, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. From what I think the other side of that was two tone as well. So I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was as sort of Italian as they get.
Absolutely, and the berry. Talk me through that, because I can't imagine it was high stock. So what made you decide to have a go on there?
Again, just fancy something a bit different. Been sort of catching quite a few out the aquadrome. That just looked a bit more of a challenge. It was quieter on there as well. I mean, it was very weedy lake. Very few clear spots. Quite shallow as well. A lot of the sort of clear areas you did have on there, you had problems with swans.
Okay.
So it was a bit of a challenge to fish. And I mean, there weren't loads of big carp in there either. A lot of what you were sort of catching and seeing was sort of low doubles, mid doubles. But there was the odd better one, obviously, like that, and saw a few other good fish.
And was it during that spell that you caught your huge tench there?
It was actually the same session as that.
Oh, was
carp.
it?
Yeah.
Talk me through that, because this is a colossal fish by anyone's standards, and still remains to be this day a colossal fish, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've still never beaten that one. I probably never will do.
How old are you then, do you think?
I was 18 at the time. Yeah, would have been 18.
And we've
18.
We've talked about this before, Gary, that whilst all the other species have gone stratospheric, with the records compared to as they were, then the tench has hardly moved.
No, it's I think 15.3 the record now, so it's hardly moved. I mean, it's 14.7 at the time I caught that one.
And yours was 14.4.
14.4. It was actually the same fish. I didn't even realise at the
There it
time.
is.
Oh, there it is. Yeah, looking a lot younger there.
Yeah. I mean, is that what a big tench has to look like because of the nature of them?
That one was, I mean, it was September time, that late August, early September. So I think it would just retain spawn, or it was one of those ones that just carried.
I think
weight.
Perhaps just before we leave that shot, I mean, it's a lovely shot.
It's a ridiculous fish, isn't it?
It's
The size of it.
incredibly.
Yeah.
You'd probably say it was spawn bound, Gary, wouldn't you?
You would, oh yeah. To look at, I mean, that is fatter than they normally.
I think that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In order to get to 14 pounds, does the tench need to be retaining a certain amount of spawn?
I think so. I mean, that record fish that did 15.3, the one out of Sheepwalk years ago, Tetley's one. I mean, that got caught quite a few times after that.
Okay.
And before as well, around the 12 pound.
Right.
12.8. So I think if you get a year where they've carried spawn over from the previous year, not got rid of it, then they go massive. But all the pitch, I mean, you remember Phil Garaya's one possibly from Raysbury.
I'm not sure if I've ever seen the picture. I might have done the day.
14.3, I think that one was. That was before.
Not as big as yours, mate.
Nah. But that was the previous record. But that again was carrying a lot of.
When you
weight.
caught this fish, did you know how much of a big deal that was?
Not to the extent I would do these.
Yeah.
I knew it was huge. I mean, fishing tring. I mean, tench were quite a big thing up there. I'd always been happy catching them. I mean, back then it was like £6-7 you were catching. But then you always used to hear about Willstone and the fish that was doing, like Alan Wilson.
Presumably that's bigger than any of those fish, though.
It was, yeah. I mean, you actually had a couple of guys from Wilston turn up to fish it after I caught that one. Because I went on to catch it again. So these guys turned up sort of asking about it. And I caught it again that night and said, do you want to come
Did they
have a look at
recognise?
it?
Did you send this to the press?
Yeah, Anglers Mail actually came and photographed it for me.
Okay.
I
Who
mean,
would that have been? Roy Westwood at the time?
No,
or?
Greg Meanahan came down. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember walking. Well, before the days of mobile phones, so sort of walked up to the phone box, phoned my dad, and he must have got hold of Anglers Mail, who then came down a few hours later.
Amazing, your dad rang the Anglers Mail.
Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah,
But I mean, I know I'm going on about it, but but for you to have not, I mean, an angler of your standing and experience have not got close to that since, and you've fished for tench as well.
I fish for them a lot, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
13.6 is the biggest I've had
Yeah.
since then, which is still a huge
Of
fish.
course.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, there's so few fish around that size.
And like you said, that was the record fish, but you didn't know it at the time.
No, I actually met Gordon who caught it. I met him about 2 or 3 weeks later, and it obviously made sense.
Had
then.
he seen
So-
your pictures at that time? At
he
that
had,
point?
yes. Yeah, I'd seen his pictures a year before, but didn't really clock at the time where it was from, or because he hadn't named the venue.
No. I mean, what a proper gravel pit tench. And
Yeah.
was that a one-off? Were there other big ones in there?
There was so few tench in there. I mean,
Right.
I remember catching that. I saw 2 or 3 tench roll that morning, but it's quite possibly the same one. Set roll
Wow.
several times.
Hence
and
why it
chucked
was
the bait.
spawn-bound, because it couldn't get its leg over.
Probably not that. Sort of
No
chucked-
males,
no,
yeah.
That's it. There was very few others in there.
I mean, I don't know what happens when you've got no male tench. I mean,
I suppose they just die out eventually,
Yeah.
I suppose, yeah.
and has that happened on the Berry? Do you know, or is it?
I don't know what's in there because it's no fishing allowed on there.
Yes.
I'm sure it must still get fish because
Yeah.
it always had a few decent carp and it was doing carp to over £40 not that long ago. But I've never heard of tench coming out of there again.
No. I mean, so that Berry Mirror is very reminiscent of a venue we're going to talk a little bit about now, which is Tolpits, right at the top of us, almost as far as the Colne Valley extends north.
Yes, it would be, yeah.
So Watford way, really.
Just before you, yeah.
How were you getting there for start? Were you driving by then?
I wasn't, no. I was either getting a lift or sometimes getting the train.
The train.
Yeah, I could get the train to Rickmansworth Station and it was about, I don't know, a couple of miles.
You had to walk.
Yeah.
Carrying your kit, because there's no barrows, are there? Then?
No barrows back then. No, it was whatever I was taking. Sometimes take a bed chair like my old Fox one, or even just take an unhooking mat and just sleep on the floor. So I did a lot of back then.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
sort of get used to sort of sleeping in a bush or whatever.
Yeah. When you look back on that, are they halcyon days, like the sleeping on the floor on your mat, or are they like, I can't believe I did that?
No, it was good days back then.
Yeah.
I mean, never. Well, saying that my back's knackered these days, so it probably did do me some harm. But yeah. It was just to make the most of it. It meant you could go fishing. I mean, if there was times when my parents went around to give me a lift, I could still get out and go fishing. Or even if I wasn't doing nights, I'd grab the floater gear. I mean, I always loved floater fishing.
Which obviously makes more sense. You get on the train with a small bag and stuff, but not the night kit.
No, you could get down to Tolpits. I mean, you obviously had the leisure sport venues on site there as well, Leisure Sport 1 and 2, which Watford Piscators had only just sort of got hold of.
Right.
And they had a couple of other lakes as well, all in the same complex. You just wander around with a floater rod and
so good value
stalking.
ticket back then. You've had some good fishing out of that already, and then you go to Tolpits, which has got a burgeoning carp scene. You're right at the start of what you'd have to say is like when Tolpits started to get a bit of traction.
Oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, the first time I think I'd seen Tolpits was it was one of the early carp worlds, number 4, something like that.
Yeah.
Paul Klinkenberg. There's a shot of him on the front, like a ready colour, holding. It was an old fish called Smiley. I mean, it already died by the time I sort of got a ticket, but yeah, with a bungalow in the background. So I sort of.
What was the score with that bungalow? No one ever lived there.
I don't know why it was there. It must have been for like club meetings or something going back far enough. Yeah, because it's quite an old club, Piscators, I think. It's been going a long time. So
and the barn as well on site.
Well, it was like a bungalow come sort of open-sided bit, so it was all one thing.
Yes.
But they turned it into a bit of a barn. They used to put the straw in there for getting rid of the algae eventually.
Right. Famous pictures of Tell bivvied up in the or like
I see.
making a brew on the haystack.
Haystacks all around. Yes.
Toby's put up. I mean, you'll have to take us in. Are they the smaller lakes, Gary? No, they're not. None of those are Tolpits, are they?
No, they're
not the right lot.
Yeah, you're close, Tobe.
Ones.
You're close. I feel like you need to go further south. There, down there, look, bottom right. That triangular lake. Is that it there, Gary?
That looks it.
There we go. Wasn't far off.
I think if you go up now, Topes towards the road, is that top one? Is that really triangular shaped one? That surely is the Tolpits.
That's Tolpits.
Yeah,
and then you've got Leisure Sport 1 and Furloughs, is Mark, which is Leisure Sport 2.
Should say tiny lake. The lake that sort of
really
became
small.
famous as Tolpits was small, wasn't
Are they
it?
the right ones? Yeah.
Yes, that's it,
Yeah. I mean, I doubt it's more than, I don't know how many acres it was actually, officially. 2.5 acres maybe.
What's that little lake above it, Gary? Is that a tiny little sort of pool?
Oh,
above?
you've got Scepter Angling
Not that one.
Society. on the top left.
Top left, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
that's
didn't even see
Scepter Angling.
Okay.
One of the famous fishing Tolpits, Sputnik, actually came out
Did
of
it?
there.
Lovely
Yeah.
carp, sort of different. It was a longer,
Yeah,
scalier
almost
one,
like
wasn't it?
linear type. It wasn't a full linear, but it was, yeah. Because I remember one of the guys, he caught it out of Scepter on, I won't name him, obviously, he caught it out of Scepter on floaters, chucked it in Tolpits, and then he caught it again that night out of Tolpits. It was the first bite he'd had for quite a long time.
I mean, that fish went on to be like £37, and not 38
yeah, it went big.
maybe.
Yeah.
But they all did. What was it? What was special about that lake?
I think it must have been, the strain of fish must definitely have come into it, because there was nothing, I mean, the lake itself was nothing that made you think it's got more food, or, I mean, there was bloodworm in there and some food. But the early days, it never used to get weedy. There was lily pads. I mean, in latter years, it did get very weedy and had some good seasons on it. But I think it was that strain of fish. You had quite a lot of Italians in there. They were the same sort of strain of fish that you had in a lot of those Colne Valley lakes that all went on to be massive.
And somehow we've utterly failed to retain as a sport, haven't we? They're nearly all gone, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, those Italian fish, you don't... I mean, I don't think anyone sells those anymore. Certainly not I'm aware of.
I've heard of them being sold, but whether they're the same, they never quite look like those ones.
No.
I mean, a unique little sort of family of carp, really. What kind of number of fish are we talking at that stage, would you say?
I reckon there's probably about 70, maybe 75 carp in there back in those days, before they had a bit of a fish kill and they lost a few to old age.
Was that the natural thinning that then allowed it to produce,
Seemed to,
mid-50s, wasn't it? Or
yeah,
low
I mean,
50s?
they topped out at sort of 30. When I went on there, they topped out at sort of like upper 20, maybe scrape a 30.
Big fish for the day, though.
There was still
biggest
big
fish
fish.
you'd fished for, presumably.
Well, before I went on to Tolpits, I actually fished Leisure Sport 2 furloughs next door, which is where I had my first 30 from.
Okay. Have we got a picture of that one?
Yeah, I think there is in there. Yeah.
Leisure Sport 2, yeah. I mean, not a lake that you hear a lot about. I certainly don't know anything about that because it's got a much overshadowed by its sort of more famous neighbour.
Yeah,
I guess.
no, it was always one of those. I mean, I went on there. I remember going on there for a couple of sessions in the winter. I actually caught some fish to just under £20. The first time I went down there, and then
wow, that's quite an interesting looking carp in itself.
Yeah,
though,
it was quite a nice looking fish as well. That one, yeah.
Good
I mean,
shape.
I mean, that
So
was
this is a very, very sparsely scaled mirror, quite sort of thick set as well, I'd imagine.
Yeah, there was quite a lot in Tolpits that were similar looking as well. You had like the Italian ones, and you had some.
Well, let's be objective about this. That doesn't look like an Italian. That could pass for a Simo as we know it today, but
Probably
obviously
could,
it wouldn't
yeah.
be back then.
Not back then. No, I imagine it's possibly one of those Anglo-aquatic garden centre
Okay.
ones that a lot of the lakes
So
around
Belgian,
there had.
potentially.
Belgian, probably.
The
yeah.
Belgian blue, as you might say.
Yeah. I mean, some of the other sort of club lakes around there had some sort of similar. Some of the big fish quite similar looking again. But that I caught opening day of the season.
And that was £30.
£30 8.
Was that the big one?
It was the big one. Yeah. There was one swim left when I got down there, which was the one I wanted to get in.
Oh,
I was fishing down one rod down the margins to a little snag, just wading it down.
Had
No one bothered because you had to get in the water.
Okay. But you're young and keen, and
Yeah, I didn't have waders. You just got in.
didn't get any in your jeans, surely. I mean,
I just stripped off to your pants and jumped in waded the bait down, and they banned wading soon after I caught that fish.
I mean, I'm going to say you are resplendent in your blue jeans there, and they do not dry out very quickly, do they?
No, you wouldn't want to go over those. No. But my plan had been to spend the season on there, but then catching that one,
you knocked the big one out
so quickly.
Yeah.
I then moved on to Tolpits and
talk me through the session quickly of that one.
I say sort of turned up. Would have been the afternoon. Everywhere was taken, apart from the swim I wanted,
which was called.
It didn't really have a name. It wasn't one that used to get fish much. But
is that why you chose it?
Yeah, I'd caught in the winter fishing down to the same sort of snag. There was a little sandy spot. It was cold wading baits down there in the winter. I was doing it in the middle of winter. But I had a fair idea the fish would be in that area that time of year.
Had you been able to bait it?
I hadn't been baiting it. I'd been for a walk, got the train down there and walked around a couple of times. I had seen fish in that part of the lake. So it was literally, you had a reed bed, a little sort of sandy area, and then a sort of snag tree. So
perfect.
Yeah, perfect. So got the take early morning. It actually came away from the snag and went off down the lake. So I remember having to jump in the water and get round into another swim to play it from. And the bloke waking up to me stood stood at the front of his swim with a rod. Like,
kidding. First day of the season, he wakes up and there's you with the big one on the end in his swim.
Then, sort of landed it, and instantly sort of knew which. Yeah, there wasn't anything else that big in there.
Were there guys on the lake like okay with this? Like, because you're a young lad to come up and knock the big one out.
Yeah, most of it's like most people are all right and sort of help you out, and you obviously always get the few that normally the ones that moan about again with the wading thing and got it banned because they can't be bothered.
Well, by that stage, your job done and out of there.
I didn't really care. No, anyway, I sort of had it by then and moved on to Tolpits.
Yeah, and no rules were broken in the process either.
No, exactly. No.
So on Tol, in what ways was the fishing similar, and in what ways was it different from Thurlows?
The fish on there were a lot more pressured. I think it had seen a lot of attention over the years. It was hard. I mean, that first year, I think I've caught 3 or 4. I think 4 carp that first season I went on there, and it took quite a while to get the first one. It was just different fishing. They were quite riggy. You could get them on your. They'd just come in and clean you out, and all that'd be left with.
And you're seeing these, aren't you? You're able to watch these fish do that.
Yeah, it was brilliant for that. I mean, it was almost like having your own sort of underwater film. You could just spend hours just watching them feeding on your spots, see how they reacted to your rigs, your bait, and sort of tweaking things. So learnt an awful lot.
Yeah, and I guess like however many years on we are now, looking back at the way those fish behaved on your spots, what do you think you should have done differently?
Probably, I mean, shorter hook lengths, probably a great big heavy inline lead drop-off
Which may or may
style.
not have existed, I suppose, at the time.
It didn't really exist back then. No, not like that. I think that would probably have sorted them out.
Were you giving them particles?
Quite a lot of particle, which, again, sort of figured out in the end, if you put too much particle in and nothing else, you'd get them feeding for 5 or 6 hours on your spot and not catch anything. So I started fishing more boily with the particle and sort of started catching them. And just how important it was to get an early bite as well. If you didn't get a bite early morning when they first got on the spot, they seem to suss your rig out and just leave it. They'd feed around it. You'd watch them for hours feeding around it, and they just wouldn't pick it up.
So talk to me about how you were setting the trap. With that knowledge, how were you setting the trap the night before to make sure you were in the best? How much bait and how did you position it within the spot?
Well, quite often you'd sort of see them feeding on one part of the spot. You'd put your rig there, and the next morning they'd obviously sussed it very early, and they'd be feeding in another part of the spot. So, I mean, it was tweaking things. I say the biggest thing that made a difference was probably tweaking the amount of particle to boilie ratio.
Because you're using boilie hook baits.
Yeah, he was using boilie hook baits back then as well. I mean, tried other things. I mean, tiger nuts and stuff were around and fishing. Yeah. I'd always sort of fish particles. But even then, I was using a lot of hemp and like pigeon conditioner stuff. So it's all small particles. But as soon as you got them feeding on the bigger stuff, they were catchable then. You wouldn't get a bite every time they come in, obviously, but they were a lot more catchable. So
were you prepping these spots, or were they spots that were opened up already?
Some of them were spots that had opened up. I mean, I used to do quite a lot of stalking on there as well, especially when it was quieter back in those days. You could sort of wind in and go off with a rod, sort of find some fish feeding in the edge or on the surface, around in the pads. I mean, I actually caught a lot of fish out there on free line worms.
Really?
Yeah, just like cut the free line.
Total opportunity. Because stalking has come to mean something a little bit different in today's carp world.
Now it's very much drop a rig down there and wait a few hours. It's sort of stalking, if anything, in the edge almost, isn't it, with one rod considered. But back in those days, you used to fish one rod
anyway,
a lot of the time anyway, especially if you had a spot in the margins. There was no point. There was a lot of bream and tension that lake. So if you putting a rod out on another spot, all it did was often meant you up to bream at peak time when they were feeding in the edge, landing it, spook them all, and that's your chance gone by fishing 2 rods.
Given that this is, you're someone who fishes for giant bream as well, I think there's a lot of us as carp anglers would welcome your advice on how to avoid the things, because is it as simple as they just don't like the margins, or like, tell me a little bit about the way you think they feed and how we can best use that?
I mean, margins, I have caught bream out the margins, but not very often. I think they tend to go around they like being in shoals, so bigger numbers. They just seem to like a bit of, open space to feed on.
Okay.
I mean, if you got
Is that about the shape of these fish, or the way that they're set up? If you like,
must be, yeah. And I think that shoal feeding sort of thing as well. I mean, even weed they don't seem to like much. If you got a nice big plateau somewhere, sort of away from the weed, you're far more likely to catch them there than in amongst weed.
I mean, there's a picture on screen now of you with a giant bream.
Oh, that's from South Troy, actually. Yes.
Okay, so still in the valley.
Yeah, still in the valley. Yeah, 14, 15, I think that one.
I mean,
I think you've got it here 15 too.
Oh, sorry, no, that's Harefield one. Sorry.
Yes, that's what
sorry, that's Harefield.
Oh, that's Harefield there.
That's Harefield. Yes, that's what actually had a go for the bream on there.
yes. I mean, we don't like them generally as a car, as a disciplined carp anglers find it difficult with bream, don't they? I think less so with tench, but they are a magnificent fish.
Oh, when they get big, yeah. I mean, I'm not so keen on them even
Snotties,
when I'm bream fishing.
Okay,
Like when they're like 7-8 pound, they're not that. They don't do a lot fight wise. They're not that impressive to look at, and they just get slime over everything. So if I do fish for them,
does a bream that size, does it have some fight to it? Because I've only played bream, like you said, a few pound, and they come in fairly effortlessly. Does a bream that size have a real fight to it?
they don't. They still don't do a lot.
Do they not?
No,
Right.
no. They're heavier to bring in, but they
They still come in.
they're
quite-
not going to go
quite tame.
tearing off, taking loads of line off
Right,
you. They're
okay.
just that shape. I think they just don't.
I mean, presumably, still, there's plenty of scope. I don't know what your biggest bream is, but there's plenty of scope out there, isn't there, to catch bigger ones than that?
I think that's that would be my
So
biggest
15.
one.
So you've got,
yeah.
but by your standards, you in terms of percentage of the record, you've got quite a way to go on.
Oh,
that,
definitely. It's one of those species that can definitely improve. Yeah.
I mean, those sort of black, tubercle, gnarly bream are quite something, aren't they?
oh, when they get old, yeah. I mean, those Harefield ones, I think, were still quite young. They just grew on.
I caught some of those.
Quickly.
I've only ever fished the lake once, but there were
Right.
so many big bream in there, seemingly at the
Yeah,
time.
it was full of them at one
Yeah.
time. I caught a lot of carp as well.
Yeah, I
In
bet.
fact, I caught more carp fishing for the bream than I did when I used to carp fish it. It was,
Oh, really?
Yeah, and in the winter as well. I mean, I was catching
Fun-
sort of middle of January. It was
We're
weird.
definitely going to talk about. I mean, the Harefield. We don't want to leave Tolpits because there's a story to be told there. But the Harefield fish you caught seemed like you caught them big as well. The carp.
Yeah, I had a couple of good ones. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like
sort of on
they
their
were
right
sort of
time
approaching
year.
their peak almost. But in terms of toll, you actually caught some famous faces, didn't you? What were to go on to be famous carp, really?
Very much. I mean, that first season I struggled a bit. Started catching towards the end of the summer, but the following, I sort of knew what I was doing a bit more then. I'd sort of sussed a few bits out, and sort of start the following season, I had two of the big fish. I had a fish called Fatty, which was one of the original big ones. I mean, that was one that used to go scraper 30, upper 20. It's 33, 13.
Oh, big. You had it big.
Yeah, I had a big weight.
Yeah.
It was a sort of PB at the time. And then a few days later, I had.
Is that Fatty there?
Yes, that's Fatty. Yep.
I mean, again, a very different looking carp to what you'd perhaps associate with Tolpits.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. I say that I think they've come from all over the
Yeah, I
place.
know.
Over the
I'm
years.
generalising, I
Yeah,
guess, aren't I? But, yeah.
And I think it depends. Being a club lake, they just sort of bought. They probably just bought a few fish in here and there, and wherever they bought them from.
I
at
mean,
the
he
time.
looks ancient already. Bless him.
That was one of the real old ones. Even then, when I started on there.
And do you remember the circumstances surrounding that capture? It looks like you were in one of those tiny little dugouts there. Like they were small swims, weren't they?
Oh, that's on the path side. That's
Is it?
got the footpath behind. I think it's just where they've been doing some work building a path. But again, that was fishing one rod down in the margins.
Was this after you'd discovered that you needed to significantly back the particle off and up the size?
Yeah, that had been sort of more boily fishing that one.
Uh-huh. What boilies were you on at the time? Were you Premier Baits? Were you sort of
I
like
was
in that
solar
whole thing?
back in
Solar.
those days.
Okay.
So just trying to think what I'd have been on. Possibly.
Like,
I was on Dairy Cream for a while,
Yeah.
and then sort of switched to the sort of fish ones, like Fish Force 5 when that came out.
Yep.
But I think that might have been out later than this. That's probably a bird food one.
I presume you know. Obviously, you're rolling these yourself, aren't you? With
Yeah,
Zano?
would have been making them at home. Yeah.
And in terms of attractors, are you keeping it minimal? Or-
Back then, I used to. In the Dairy Cream, I used to use Nash strawberry oil palatant quite a lot.
I mean, it sounds like sounds like you could eat it.
Oh, it was. It smelled lovely. I mean, I still love that flavour even today. It's one I've used quite a lot for tench in sort of tench like method mixes, floaters. I still use it a lot. It's,
Really?
Yeah, it's one of those sort of attractors that it just worked for years.
So, did anyone catch out in the pond at Toll?
Yeah, you did sometimes. Yeah, I've caught a few. There were certain spots. that you could sort of catch, especially when it was years it was weedier. You'd catch
because the bream just don't enjoy working.
No, they don't
in
like being in amongst
spaces.
it. No, all them little tiny spots in amongst it. I mean, people used to catch fish into the pads as well, sort of casting to the edge of the pads, but there wasn't anything that interesting. It was just like silty bottom, and it just happened to be where the edge of the pads were.
So once again, you've kind of had the big one straight away, or within.
One of the. I mean, I then caught the small Italian a couple of days after that, 2 or 3 days after that, at 34. So my PB didn't.
What's the late record at that stage?
I think it was around 35-ish.
Okay, so you're knocking on the door.
It would have been up that sort of way, yeah.
And the small Italian suggests that the big one was bigger, but perhaps not.
When they got names, it would have been, yes. Yeah, I mean, the small Italian, the one that a lot of people will know as Plodder. It just wasn't called that back then. It got that name a good few years later.
So have you called it Plodder in our shots that we've got here?
Don't think so, no. I think
there it is, yeah.
Okay. Is that the capture?
Yes, yeah, that would have been it at 34.
And you had named it Plodder, actually.
Oh, I put it in there because everyone would know what it. Yeah.
I mean, this was the most famous carp that Tolpits went on to produce. I mean,
that went on to over £50. That fish. Yeah.
Incredible carp. I mean, just describe that fish for us, Gary.
I mean, again, it was literally one rod down the margins. I'd had that other fish, Fatty, a few days before, sort of first thing in the morning. Same trip that was, yeah.
You've had a brace of mid-30s or 30s,
yeah. Now, smashed PB sort of twice.
Okay.
Yeah, that £30 8 from Leisure Sport 2 would have been the best before that. And yeah, again, sort of another bite early morning. Just fishing one rod down there. And then, good fight.
Exciting fishing?
It was, yeah. I mean, being able to watch them as well, exciting and frustrating as well.
Were you tempted to lower the bait in first thing in the morning, or did you have it out overnight to sell?
Normally put it in overnight and sort of left it once they were on it.
You probably knew that at no stage in the night were you likely to get a bite.
I can't. It's very rare you ever got a bite before sort of around first light.
But you like to have it all settled.
You'd have it all
quiet.
set up because sometimes they'd appear very early. You'd sort of
like 4 o'clock.
By the time it was light enough to see in the water,
they were already there.
They were already sort of there, or just sort of ghosting in and out. You'd see like the odd one. And
was this a first light bite?
That would have been soon after first light. Yeah,
because. What was that? Because generally, if you were getting it right, it would happen straight away, and if you get it wrong, it wouldn't.
Yeah, very much so. I think they either caught one or they knew there was something
so
wrong.
Frustrating as you felt the mornings ebb away, though. At that point,
yeah,
because you're like, well, I'm definitely not getting one now.
If you tried to do anything, they were gone. They didn't come back. If you spooked them off the margins, sort of that time of the morning, they weren't coming back in.
I mean, there's there's that famous picture of Terry Hearn set up behind the camo screen there, isn't there? Like probably on the same footpath, I guess. That
he would have been on that size, I'm sure. Yeah. I mean, I caught a few out of there at night over the years, sort of fishing closer in when it was weedy. But once you got a bite off of a spot, that was it. You knew you weren't going to get another bite. I mean, I had one year in particular where I did really well on there, but it was chocker with weed. Hardly anyone was fishing it, and I was a lot younger then. You sort of catch a fish, move to another swim, and sometimes you catch 2. I think I even had 3 in a night out of 3 different swims.
So you're barbel fishing from basically
pretty much,
catch one, move on, catch one, move on, sort of, and rotate the bait in. Or would you bait a swim as you left or anything like that?
Sometimes you'd trickle a bit of bait in here and there. Yeah. I mean, I was making bait on the bank.
Yeah.
Back then, if I was certainly during sort of school holidays or holidays sort of from university, ground sheet on the bed chair, and but not even bothering with boilage, just making sausages and just boiling them as sausages, breaking them up, and it's your only fishing close range. And
what kind of anglers were we talking about on there at the time?
There was some pretty no one that well known when I was fishing it initially, but sort of people who went on to be good sort of local anglers, sort of on some of the other club lakes.
And as we know, those guys can be very often every bit as good as the guys who we do know.
So, very much so. Yeah, you look at what some of them round that way who never publicise anything, what they've caught over the years, their catches would be up there pretty much with anybody. But then it got popular. I suppose it would have been, I mean, Nick Hellier was fishing it a little bit, and then Terry sort of started on there as well. Although he actually struggled to start with on there. It was quite interesting with those sort of stiff hinge rigs.
Yeah.
Just didn't seem to
obviously
work.
Came what he was confident in, and these fish are perhaps the situations he's having to fish them? I don't know. Was it all still margin fishing then, or?
Yeah, I mean, he's tried to sort of do it his way initially, and didn't work. But then when he did, I mean, once he did suss it, it didn't take him long to. And
of course, yeah.
The first fish he caught was the common out there.
By which stage that was £40? Oh, 39, I think.
39.
Yeah.
So yeah, I weighed it for him. Yeah, he come and wake me up, and it was the only one I wanted. Still, he was like,
really?
Sorry, mate.
Because by this stage you've been on there a few years, I guess.
Yeah, it'd been a few years. Yeah, I mean the last year I sort of spent a lot of time on there. I think I had 29 fish that year.
Loads.
Yeah, it was
Top rod.
It would have been that year by quite a while. Yeah, I mean that was like probably half the stock or more at the time. And I had a lot of the ones I wanted. I had the big Italian that year. I had Leicester's as well.
God, Topes have got a fire. Leicester's another fish that did knocking on 50. It certainly did upper 40s.
It certainly
didn't
did, yeah. Sort of.
Yeah. I mean, looking very young and clean there, and the fish too.
Yes, yeah. Yeah.
There's another grey Italian, but this one's got some sort of like, it's got more scales. It's got smattered with little starbursts as well. There was that fish that was on your mind, like while you were there, one you knew of, and
it was one I really wanted. I mean, I actually thought I'd messed my chance up for that one when I caught it. It's funny enough, it's from the same spot where I caught the those first 230s that I'd ever had out of there.
Yeah.
But it was like one rod, and just as I was lowering it in the evening, it came swimming through with a rig. It just sort of froze rig mid water. It just carried on swimming, and I thought, that's not coming back, but it did, and caught that one. It was just in the dark as well.
Do you think that you were catching fish that arrived on your spot on their own, or were they always with other fish? How was that working?
They were often you'd get more than one feeding on the spot.
Which needed.
That one used to go about with 2 sort of low to mid 20 mirrors, both of which I caught quite a few times.
Oh, the bodyguards.
Yeah, basically, yeah. And then eventually caught it.
How big was that one that had was Leicester's?
35-12.
I mean, these are big carp, Gary.
Even for then, they were big back then.
By then, is it late 90s?
That would have been, probably would have been.
Or early 2000s even?
Probably 98-ish, 90, somewhere around there.
Yeah.
Yeah. 98, 99, I would guess.
A mid-30s still big to me today. So
same.
And we're a long way further on now, aren't we? So, but a lovely, I think, great nick as well.
They were not. There was some really nice fish in there. I mean, even some of the ones that had sort of gone by the time. I mean, one of my favourite ones out there was a fish called Two-Tone, which I think possibly got a picture of there. But that sort of got a lot of people won't have seen that one because it had already died before sort of everyone sort of turned up on there.
That's that one?
Yeah.
I mean, again, the similarities with Leicester's, aren't there? Coloration, the roughness of its skin, the golden scales, the greyness of its flanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really old one as well. I mean, I don't know how old they were, those fish. They could easily have been like 40 years old, some of those, I would guess.
Oh, were you aware of like a stocking record or anything like that? Or had you spoken to people about where they might have come from?
It was very much a match club, so they weren't that interested in it. There was no one really. I mean, even the committee meetings or the sort of AGMs and stuff, it was all about match fishing stuff.
Okay.
They just wanted to ban anything carp angling related. Like, you'd sort of get something new every year. Like, why don't we ban buzzers? Like, why? Well, just because we want to.
You'd have found a way around it, Gary, I'm sure.
I'm sure probably would have done. Yeah.
Are you still sleeping on the floor at this stage, or are you now driving?
I probably wouldn't have been driving then. Because I went to university up in Birmingham and didn't really have much point having a car. I didn't learn to drive till after that. So, yeah, I'd probably have still been getting a lift down there at that stage.
But did a lot of people's fishing takes a back seat when they go to university? Were you restricted to summers only or like holidays only at that point?
I probably should have been, but I used to do quite a lot of time.
I was going to say, did university take a back seat?
Yeah. I've got another reading week, Mum. Yeah. Any chance of a lift down the lake?
Oh, sure. I mean, your parents didn't choose to have a word with you at this point about how much fishing you're doing.
They were always, as long as sort of exam results and stuff were okay.
Yeah. What did you study?
Money, banking, and finance.
Oh wow, okay.
Birmingham, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned you did a year in finance, did you?
It'd been about a year before I then got into fishing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't really enjoying that. I was looking around for something else, and in fact, it was a guy who was fishing Harefield at the time. He said, "Oh, I saw a job going in Angler's Mow."
I mean, your mum and dad have just supported you through. I mean, you probably supported yourself, Gary, being as it was finance.
I was working as well. I was working in a pub.
But they've seen you go through university, and then you decided you're not going to work in finance. You're actually going to go and probably work for a pittance for in the angling trade.
Yes,
at the time.
Yeah, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't too bad actually, because Anglers Mail were part of IPC Media.
It was based in London as well.
Based in London,
Yeah.
it was actually not bad, like salary wise and everything. So it wasn't too bad.
What was the first job you got then? What was the job that you took at?
It was just on the news desk. So yeah, sort of. Yeah, just writing all the. Yeah, I mean that's pretty much what I worked at all throughout while I was there. Was as sort of news reporter.
Well, because they were a news magazine, you know.
It was very news based. Yeah. I enjoyed getting out as well, going out, sort of photographing record fish or doing features and stuff. So yeah,
I think one thing that had always fascinated me about that era, and I seem to remember asking Chris Ball about it on an interview we did for SIP, was about the competitive side of securing scoops between the likes of Carp Talk, the Mail, the Times. Like, how did that actually work?
Quite often you get someone phone up with like a record fish. You almost got into like a bidding sort of process.
Yeah.
They'd phone you up, then they'd phone the Times, then they'd come back and
well, the Times have offered me this. Can you match it?
Yeah, very much so. Can you beat that? And I mean, I think in the end we came up with a policy. You'd offer them what it was, and that was it. If they either wanted it or they didn't, else you'd end up like saying a bidding war.
Can you share what you would offer for a story like that? Is that something you can
back
share?
then you'd probably like £500.
That's a lot of money then.
That was a
isn't
lot
it?
of money. That's what I mean. That's a lot of money. Yeah. So you can understand why people would play you off each other.
Oh, very much so. Yes, yeah, for the exclusive.
Now, would the guys who played the game, would they have been the hardened specimen guys, or would they have been just chancers who'd caught a big one and
more hardened specimen guys?
Oh, so they knew the crack.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh God. Yeah. I mean, some of them very much so. You'd get them. They'd sell a story to the Times.
Yeah.
Then you get their mate phone up and say, "We sold this to the Times, but I took a few photos as well."
Are you kidding?
No, it's happened a couple of times.
What?
Where
do you think
either us or the Times have bought an
do you
exclusive.
think they were both in on it?
Oh, I'm sure they must have been.
Right.
Yeah. Back. Yeah.
But did that mean that you got called out as well? But you must have seen some incredible sights at that stage. Or was it just the photographers like the likes of Roy Westwood and the
Greg and Roy probably did more of that just because of the experience side of it. Because again, that's days before digital, so
you'd have been shitting yourself.
Yeah,
frankly.
Yeah. On slide film when you don't, you put your films in, get them back the next morning and see if you got anything or not.
Yeah.
But one of the barbel records I photographed, 21. In fact, it's the current record still. Graham King's one.
Yeah. Was that the Traveller?
Yeah.
Yeah. So from the famous.
I've been in the swim the afternoon before, fishing for it.
And watching it.
Yeah, watching it. Came out second in the draw. Because it's days only, so you had a draw in the mornings if there's more than one person there. Graham got number one in that swim.
How did he know the fish were there?
There was quite a few in that area at the time, so everyone who was fishing it regularly knew that's where you wanted to get. And about a couple of hours into the day, I got a call. Yeah, he came down and got me. So you were coming photograph record.
And do you feel pressure with that kind of thing? Because you strike me as a guy who, the record is an important thing.
Yeah, I mean, you feel pressure in terms of the pictures coming out when you get. I mean, in terms of actually taking the shots, it's just like you would. It's just any other fish, isn't it? It's just, but more.
I don't know. Having never photo. I mean,
it is like photographing anything in terms of the process you go through. But then also you feel pressure if you do mess it up. Then,
But you had a process, which is something. I mean, at that stage, you're conscious of capturing fishing as much as you can, or I mean, you're a guy that you love your photography now. Was that the case then?
Yeah, I was always into photography. I mean, I learnt back when I was in my teens, sort of on an old fully manual camera, sort of light meter and all that. So I did have some idea when it came to settings. I mean, it was still slide film then, but things had moved on. Sort of auto settings.
So did Graham pass you his camera, or did you do some on yours and his? How did it work?
I think I shot them on my camera. Someone else would have been shooting on his, and there would have been several cameras on it at the time. Definitely.
What kind of impact did a fish? I mean, those fish were huge news at the time, weren't they? The Adams Mill
massive,
barbel.
yeah.
What did it look like? Do you remember the moment when you?
I remember the sheer size of it. I mean, seeing them in the water, that was the first time I'd seen a 20-pound barbel on the bank, and it was massive. I mean, I think that that same day I had a 15 something, like a scraper 15 myself, but that was just massively different.
I mean, a scraper 15 back in then, what would it have been, 20 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, that was still a big fish. Yeah. I think it was 15.4 or something, that fish. Yeah.
I mean, those Adams millfish changed the game, didn't they? In terms of what barbel could do in our waters.
Oh, very much so. I mean, it was only a few years before that. The record was still 14, 12 or something. Not that many years before that. And double figure fish were sort of making big news.
We may well come on to this, but you've recently caught a 20-pound barbel. It's taken you 20 years, I guess, to get a fish of that. It just shows you how big they were, I think.
Oh yeah, I mean, there was those fish. Obviously the Wensum fish were going around the 20-pound mark. There was one, maybe two Wensum fish at the time.
From memory, huge framed fish, the Wensum fish, and maybe the Adams millfish shorter and fatter. Would that be fair?
Yeah, they probably were. Yeah, I mean, there was a bit of a mixture in
Bow,
Adams
the
Mill.
Wensum fish called Bow.
I can't remember now what the big one was.
But I think the point I was making, it's taken you a long time to catch a 20-pounder.
Oh God, there's not many about. No, there's very few.
There's a picture of it.
Oh yeah, that's the Thames. Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, getting one out of the Thames probably meant more to me in the end.
I mean, a Thames fish
than getting. Yeah, I mean, I came very close to catching the Traveller a couple of times. Never had it, but yeah, that probably meant more.
I mean, was this winter or last winter?
That was last February.
Last February.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, funny enough, talking about enthusiasm for fishing coming back from foreign trips, I'd actually flown back from Uganda the day before that, so I was totally jet lagged. The weather had been warm. It was just going. I could see the temperature dropping off, and knew there wasn't going to be a chance for barbel for a sort of good few weeks after that. I mean, it was really cold when I turned up there, having come from 35 degrees. And in flood. But yeah,
I mean, would you say that fish is in peak condition there?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those fish. It comes out. I mean, that gets caught a few times. That fish, it is a known one, as most big fish are. But it comes out sort of like 18s in the summer and autumn. Then it always seems to pile the weight on back end.
I mean, it looks enormous. It looks like an Iberian barbel to me. The depth of the flank, I think, is what impresses me.
It
about
was ridiculous. I mean, to be honest, the length of it doesn't show in the picture
because
the fish is so deep, but it was so long as well.
I mean, when that came up, did you know immediately that it must feel like hooking the bloody sandbag?
It actually snagged me. The line was through a tree.
Yeah.
I'd had a couple of fish in the same swim a month or so before that's got snagged in the same tree, and with a bit of effort and patience had come out, and that did eventually, but it just felt so heavy. I thought it must still be a bit of the snag on it, and I was expecting a lump of tree to come up and a barbel, but then when just a barbel came up, I mean, it's really muddy, the water, so you couldn't see clearly, but seeing where the hook link was going, where the towel came up when it first hit the surface, I knew it was big. And then, when it went in the net, I knew. Yeah. I didn't know for definite, but I had a fair idea which fish it must be.
I have to ask how you feel in that moment of capture versus, let's say, an alligator gar or a buffalo carp. Like,
that would have meant more than sort of the gar or the buffalo carp, definitely, because I've spent a lot of time on the Thames over the last 20 odd years. I mean, I'd had them to 15-10 before that from another stretch, and other doubles, but nothing close to that. So it was a lot of effort had gone into it. But then some of my foreign trips, like say Marseille fishing or Nile perch, where I've spent a lot of time on a venue or in a country fishing for them, it's a similar feeling when you get a big one. Yeah. I mean, that one I was dancing about on the bank, and Who
do you call? Like, are they
self-takes? They're
self-takes.
Yeah. There was no one else down there because of the conditions. I say it was
savage,
cold. Yeah, the water temperature was starting to drop fast, but I've often found that's the best time for big barbel.
What was it? Kind of spurs them on, do you think?
I think they have one last, especially if you've had a period where it's been warm for quite a while. The fishing you catch, but it's never that good. But that last little bit, I think they know.
I should have gone this week, shouldn't I?
It would have been. I would probably have been out Sunday evening if I was going to go barbel fishing. Yeah, because it's that it was cold that night and cold during the day. But that turn in temperature, I think, just turns them on. They just know that that cold weather's coming in. Same sometimes on lakes, isn't it? Like if a freeze up's coming, the fish almost know that something's happening, and they'll have one last sort of feed before they sort of go a bit more dormant.
So you've seen the Traveller. What other opportunities did the job afford you? And were you just literally stuck behind a desk, like on the end of the phone to these guys, like a shorthand or whatever, writing down your news stories and getting them to press?
I mean, a lot of it was based in the office, sort of on the phones back in those days, and occasionally going out for a fish or features, like covering the British Carp Angling Championships, stuff like that, or big matches like nationals and things like that, which was always interesting, getting out of the office. But it was mainly office based back in those days, I would have said.
Did it mean though that you were, for the first time, plugged into a national scene rather than just a regional one?
Yeah, very much so. Certainly on the specimen side of things, you were talking to quite a few different people. I mean, sometimes even if they weren't publicising where they were catching from, they'd sort of tell you a bit of stuff to keep to yourself. So it's quite good from that sort of point of view. Even just seeing what was getting caught. If you knew a load of barbel were getting caught, it made sense to get out and go barbel fishing. Yeah, the conditions are obviously good. So yeah, no, I did used to hear quite. It definitely helped a lot being in that sort of grapevine. I mean, these days I'm sort of totally out the loop on that sort of stuff. I just go and do my own fishing. And probably don't get to hear anywhere near what I used to. Okay, right. So you're not like, specimen anglers generally have clubbed together, haven't they? Over the years, they've formed groups, but you've been kind of a loner apart from your time at the Mail, would you say? Yeah, pretty much so. I mean, these days, I like places that are quiet as well. I wouldn't go and sit on somewhere if it was absolutely rammed and not a particularly nice place to fish, just because it happened to have something big in it. It's got to be something that I've got to be somewhere that I want to be. Yeah.
And you went on to write a column for the Mail, didn't you, as well?
Yes.
How did that start? How did that when did they? Was there an angler that dropped the column and you took it over, or how did it work?
Yeah, it would have been. I mean, Andy Little had it originally for years, and Ian Welch did it for a few years. I mean, by that stage, I already had like an occasional column in there about my own fishing, not like a weekly one, but they'd get me to do bits every now and again. And then when Ian Welch sort of left, the editor offered me the job of doing that full time.
And how does that work then? Because you're still presumably, you have other duties, but you have to turn a column in every week.
I went freelance, completely free. It was completely freelance at the time. It was on similar money to what I'd been earning.
So you had to leave the company to carry on work.
So I left, to go and do the column. So instead of being in the office 5 days a week, I was sort of out on the bank.
So you're a full-time fisherman at that point?
Yeah, basically, I suppose I would have been.
Journalist,
yeah. I mean, I had a like consultancy with Drennan as well at the time, and some bait bits and pieces. But yeah, it would have been. But it's one of those things you had to treat as a job. You needed to get a column every week. Needed to get a head on a few. You couldn't just think, I'm going fishing. It's, I reckon, sort of 3 or 4 days of the week were spent getting the column, like getting the fish, going out and catching something, getting the photos done for it, and then writing it.
How much were you left to your own devices with that, and how much did they say, Gary, we could really do with something on X, Y, or Z?
It was pretty much whatever I wanted to do. So totally free. Complete freedom to just go out and fish for whatever conditions were right for at the time. It had to be something specimen related. I mean, some of that meant going out with other people as well. So that was quite, that was quite good. Yeah, even from the photography. I mean, trying to get action shots of yourself and self takes is never easy. It's bad enough fish shots, but trying to settle the camera up and then trigger it off whilst trying to play fish is
I mean, prestigious work though. There aren't many people who've held those sort of columns. Obviously Martin Bowler springs to mind. Andy Little, going. Like you say. It's not without pressure, is it?
Oh, definitely not. No, I mean, you had to go out and catch them. I mean, when it was freezing cold, the lakes were frozen, the rivers were in flood, and it was tipping it down with rain outside as well. You're sort of thinking, well, where do I go now to go and catch something? Which again comes back to sort of planning ahead and trying to get sort of a few columns in the bag that you can use if you do get difficult conditions like that. So
So I mean, very much a job. You took a professional approach.
You had to treat it as a job. It wouldn't have lasted otherwise. You'd have ended up in a situation where you had a week and you didn't have anything to write about.
So how long did you keep the column going?
That was about 6 years. In the end,
Fond memories of that time?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I mean, it was good to have complete freedom just to go and fish when you wanted to. I mean, my own fishing, I could sort of fit around it.
Yeah.
So if conditions sort of good for that, you could go and do, and you already had a few columns in the bag, you could, yeah.
Did you feel that you're most comfortable when you were a few columns to the good and you could perhaps take the foot off the gas, or?
Yeah, it was always good to have a bit of a
Yeah.
a bit of a buffer there. Especially as it had to be sort of specimen size fish that you were going for, because I mean, yeah,
Okay.
you could have runs where you're not catching a lot
Well,
for
of course.
a few
I mean,
weeks.
yeah. Is that a genuine cover, that one?
Oh, it is. Yeah, that'd be. It's a Farlow's fish, that one.
2014.
Yeah, that'd be a Farlow's.
So
fish.
that would 14 have been towards the end of your time doing that?
Yeah, that'd been like 4 years into doing the column. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But it's handy, Tobes, thanks for that, because that is a lovely comment. I do want to get back onto carp before we talk a little bit more about your stuff elsewhere. Harefield is an extremely famous venue in the valley. Talk to me a little bit about how you ended up on there, because from the pictures that you've sent, you actually caught some of the very famous carp that lived in there, and you caught them at big weights as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those venues I'd always read about as a kid, going back to sort of mailing books. You had obviously Carp World at the time, and some of the other carp magazines. People like Martin Clark, Stuart Gillam, all those sort of people fishing on there, catching big carp. And it was local as well, so it sort of made sense that it would be a venue.
And could you just
become
get
of
a
interest.
ticket through Boyo? You just literally pay the money and walk on?
Yeah, it was a syndicate, but they had places available. A mate of mine, James Eames, who I fished with quite a lot when we were kids, he got a ticket on there before me, was catching some good fish. Tolpits, I still had fish that I wanted out of there, but I'd fished it quite a lot and sort of done a lot of what I wanted on there. So sort of looking for new challenges. So yeah, when the chance came to get a ticket on Harefield, sort of took that.
Can you describe to those people who don't, who perhaps haven't seen pictures of Harefield, because it is a very unique venue, isn't it? Tell us what it was like.
It was a lot bigger than what I was used to. I mean, the end where you turn up, it was still a working gravel pit at the time. Well, they weren't extracting gravel out there. That had finished. The barges going up and down taking gravel had finished by the time I started on there, but they were still washing gravel, very much sort of gravel workings. And the lake was starting to silt. I mean, even back then it was starting to silt up from one end. A couple of the sort of famous swims had gone. I mean, you had quite a lot of well-known anglers on there, or sort of reasonably well-known.
There were still good
anglers.
anglers there when you got the sort of what one might consider the heyday of it would have been a few years before, I guess.
It definitely would have been. I mean, the real famous anglers, shall we say, they'd sort of moved on by the time I was on there, but there were still some pretty good, handy anglers on there.
And in terms of this incredible, I don't think we can understate just how dramatic the silting up process was.
Oh, that was ridiculous.
Because you mentioned like swims had been buried, hadn't they?
Yeah. I mean, where they wash at one end. I mean, they weren't doing so much in those days. I mean, now the lake's almost gone completely. It's almost completely
Is it really?
silted up. Yeah, there's very little of it left, just at one end, a couple of the bays. But back then, there was the Mad Swim and the Hump, were two of the famous
Forgive me,
swims.
if that's not the right area, if I'm
Well,
on the right track?
Gary, you're going to have to take him in, because
Survey Lake on that side.
Is it down here?
we're just looking. No, it's going to be a really coloured one, mate. It's going to Harefield, so
It'd be opposite Survey.
keep going in. That's
the other. There you go. There's Broadwater.
Is that it there on the right?
It's at top left.
Keep going.
Very top left.
Keep going up.
That's it. There you go.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
so this is presumably not that one. Tope,
that's
down the tea coloured one. Yeah.
Tea-coloured one.
Sorry, I didn't even
Yeah.
realise.
So just zoom in, Tope. So all that green area, Gary, in the middle of that was lake, wasn't it?
That was all lake.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was literally lake.
Forgive me, sorry, I wouldn't have spotted that.
Yeah, no, it's tough to see. There's not a lot left, is there? So
I mean, the edge of the green area is the famous point swim,
yes.
where you've got those couple of trees going round in a bit of an arc.
I mean, there's no.
there's no water there. Yeah.
And this is fine sediment. I mean, presumably you can't walk on that stuff.
No. It
must be like the most
dangerous.
dangerous.
Sinking sand. Yeah, I mean, basically they stopped working on the lake, but because I had the workings there, they were still bringing gravel in from elsewhere to wash it.
Yeah.
So all the sort of sediment off of that was just filling the lake in.
And you've still got the sort of Slugs Bay at the top here, is it?
Yeah, you got Slugs Bay and Goose Bay.
Yeah.
So those two.
I mean,
have still
are
got a
there
bit
still
of water.
carp in there?
There'll still be carp in. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure now with HS2 moving in.
Okay.
You can't get near that part of the sort of place anymore. But
Right.
There certainly were carp still in there. Yeah.
But when you fished it, it didn't look anything like that. You still had open water to go out all the way down.
Open water. I mean, when the water was low, you had all the bars sticking out there. I mean, it had some really savage gravel bars on there as well.
Famously savage,
really,
weren't they?
Yeah.
And did you have to take steps to fish around that, or were you happy fishing at the classic Harefield style of range and like tips up and?
Yeah, I mean, did some of that. I mean, I always caught more fish fishing at 70, 80 yards over a big bed of bait.
Okay.
And the average size seemed to be bigger as well.
Yeah.
Than the guys who were just blasting singles out as far as they could chuck them. But yeah, I mean, cut-offs were bad on there. I mean, it wasn't an easy lake. You could sit on there all week for a bite.
Really?
And when you got a bite, you'd just get a beat, bobbing it at the top, and then before you could even pick the rod up, hit the deck, and
Gone.
you'd been cut off.
Was this while had you started at IPC at this stage?
Yes, I had. Yes.
Okay. So how was your fishing life fitting in around work at that point?
Well, saying that, when I started IPC, that was sort of, I'd already fishing Harefield. Then I'd sort of started when I was at university, and then
Started at Harefield, yeah.
Yeah, on
Okay.
Harefield, but I was still fishing it when I sort of worked for the magazine. But I mean, it was mainly fishing sort of weekends or using up holiday at the time. Because I mean, back then I didn't used to travel much.
Yeah.
For sort of fishing, sort of abroad. So
Right.
my holiday was sort of spent carp fishing in the UK.
Yeah. And in terms of the areas of the lake that you were you able to deploy this like 70 yards baiting type strategy? Were there certain swims that you needed to get into to do that?
Yeah, I mean, there were certain areas where they tended to be caught at range. I mean, around the workings swim, that was literally fishing out to the workings, and a few of the other swims. But you had like areas like the stick bar, which probably like 100 yards out to the sort of third bar.
I mean, you can't even see the bars on this picture now, can you?
See them now, no.
But the stick's down at the bottom here, isn't it? On that long straight bank.
Sort of on that
sort of area.
around there, yeah.
I mean,
the goose area was probably one of my favourite sort of swims. Sort of
I can imagine.
Yeah, 'cause
stalking,
it's all,
like close in.
range stuff.
Yeah.
There's another swim, Someone's Coming, which was just round from the point.
Yeah.
That was a good swim, Cloak. You had stuff. Yeah. I mean, my biggest fish from Harefield came from that swim, fishing at sort of 75, 80 yards.
Really?
Just sort of in front of a bar, fishing the front of it as well, so you didn't get cut-offs.
Okay. And what kind of techers are we talking about at this stage? Have things moved on from your sort of dom off knot and
yeah, it would have
boiling
been.
approach?
I'm sure probably would have been knotless knots and stuff back then. I mean, probably still quite simple rigs. I mean, one of my favourite rigs that I've always used, certainly for bottom baits, is just a fairly simple hair rig with a bit of silicone, with the hair coming off round.
Oh, you trap it weighting the point.
Towards the point. Yeah, I mean, it's something I did even going back days with the Kimryu spade end hooks with a swivel sliding round the hook.
Okay.
And the stop round at the bar.
So you've gone. That was quite advanced for the time, surely.
Yeah, it was. I think Solar were the first ones to bring out those micro swivels.
Yeah.
And the little hook beads. So it would have been
Around that
no
time.
one else would have been using it.
No.
I think I had an article in Big Carp back then. I'd have been about
I remember that.
1920. Yeah, with a picture of the rig in. I was using back then. Yeah.
So you'd felt the need to, not the need. You'd felt the kind of that you could write and you had something to say even then.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always been interested in writing to some extent. I mean, I wouldn't say I was always more into sort of maths and science than I was English.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of A levels, maths, physics, economics. So not very much.
Yeah.
Sort of writing orientated, but yeah, something I'd always enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
Even going back, to then.
I mean, it's always quite telling because obviously back then there was very little for you to gain other than the sort of your love of sharing what you were doing. You know, it's not like you were going to be given bait or a sponsorship or a job.
No, definitely not. No, I think the thing with Big Carp came about because I think that was probably through Nick actually, because he'd done
Started
a few
writing
articles in there, and he got me to do one on sort of the Tolpits sort of fishing.
Yeah. So actually, Harefield was a step backwards in terms of not backwards, but you went simpler, if anything, with your setup.
Yeah, well, fairly. I mean, stuff was moving on then. I mean, lead
Probably materials and stuff.
Yeah, materials definitely would have been hook link materials.
So maybe
like
you like your snakeskin type.
You definitely have had
first
coated
braids
braids
maybe,
out around then. Yeah, because I mean, Tolpits I was using. What was I using on there? Oh, Supernova.
Okay, so a
Crystal
supple
braid.
braid.
Yeah, it was really nice. It was quite flat as well. It seemed to
very soft.
Very soft.
Yeah.
Quite a flat profile as well. I think they had trouble getting rid of it. It seemed to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Almost not be able to sense that.
No, I think they couldn't feel it or grip it or yeah.
In terms of like the coated braids we talked about, because you're now fishing what is relatively long range, even 70, 80 yards is not short range.
No.
Are you having to consider the efficiency and the tangle proof nature of your setups?
I use nylon quite a lot now. I mean, I've always liked nylon hook links anyway. I mean, even in more recent years, I mean, where it's not weedy or snaggy, if I can get away with a nylon hook link, long hair.
So by nylon, I mean it certainly served people like Laney quite well, didn't it? Those sort of Phil Thompson, like very tried and tested. But in terms of the actual nylon, are we just talking about cutting stuff off your spool and using that? Or
some of it would have been. Maxima was always good.
Okay,
that was one. Yeah, Maxima Chameleon. I always found. Yeah, that was always a good line for hook links. I mean, obviously you had things like Amnesia, so we were playing about with stiff rigs and stuff like that then as well. Yeah.
And how did that impact on your hook choice, given that that it's a stiffer material?
I mean, back then there wasn't a massive choice of hooks around. I mean, that would have been before
Contis maybe with the slightly outturned eyes.
Yeah, you would have had those. Yeah, Star Points were around, weren't they? I can't remember if they had an outturned eye.
Did,
it would have been slightly outturned. Yeah. I mean, that was obviously before a lot of.
And is this post Mike Cavanagh's sort of stiff rig, Amnesia stiff rig, or are you experimenting with this at the same time that I think he was probably late 80s, wasn't it?
Yeah, it'd have been before that, definitely. Yeah. I mean, stiff rigs were
a thing,
but they were definitely a thing.
And you're carrying the hair straight through, are you, at this point?
Quite often just dental floss just whipped on for hair. Yeah.
So pretty effective, really. It's going to kick away. It's not going to tangle. You've got supple hair and a hook that's not kicked over too much to narrow the gape.
Yeah, very much. Yeah.
And lead clips by then?
Lead clips, I'm sure they were around.
Nashi ones, maybe. The very
first ones, or helicopters we used quite a lot as well back then.
Okay,
yeah.
Makes sense. Talk to me about some of the fish you caught, because looking through your little folder that you sent, round tail, cool carp, half tail. I wasn't a fish that I was hugely familiar with, but what a great gnarly old warrior that is.
Yeah, I mean, round tail, that's probably one of my favourite ones out there. Not just the size, but the fish is quite a well-known fish as well. One I've sort of read about in
Basil's
books.
Bush and stuff, yeah. So there's round tail. I mean, I guess one thing you have to say about Harefield is it was never clear, was it? So the fish were always quite pale, but that kind of added to the kind of sense of individuality about them.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, they're quite. Yeah, that was caught from the goose swim as well. Fishing, probably only fishing about 25 yards out.
Really,
just literally just off the side of the goose. I think I'd had a couple of other fish as well before that one.
How do you feel that they navigated that incredibly coloured environment?
So colour-wise, you had, when I was on there, you had years where it was coloured. Other years, it was quite clear because there was weed in there. Some years, so it wasn't like it was in latter years. Probably where you'd seen it, where it was so coloured then that they. A lot of the bars had started silting up as well by that stage.
Okay, must have been super shallow by then. In that
case.
It
would have been. Yeah.
But these fish, they weren't sort of like super aware of lines and that kind of thing, because or the touch of things around them, given how coloured it could be.
No, probably less so, and the fact that people fished at range as well a lot of the time on there. The fish also, they used to move a lot on there as well.
Really,
you couldn't hold them when they came through in front of you. You might get a bite or a couple of bites, and then they'd be good.
And
it didn't matter how much bait you had out there.
A couple of key was that?
Yeah, I think even if you'd put more out, I mean, you'd see them coming down the lake showing sometimes, not all the time, but when they did move, they properly moved, and in numbers as well. And
so we're talking shoalfish.
I think so on there, yeah. They come through, they'd sort of just wipe your bait area out, and then someone else cut the swims up and get a bite, and then they'd be off again.
Okay, and even big fish like roundtail, old fish, they were still moving in shoals, do you think?
Yeah, well, half-tail, when I caught that was when I did see him moving up the lake.
Okay.
I mean, back in those days, on a Friday or Saturday night, quite often used to go down to the pub for a couple of pints and stuff, and my mate had actually sort of wound in, come round and said, time to go to the pub. I'm not going. I could see him coming, and within about half hour, I sort of had a little drop back, sort of picked into it. Did absolutely nothing at all. No real weight to it. I was like,
what is this?
Like, bream.
Yeah,
like all them carp out there moving through it. It's a bream, and wound it all the way in, and literally it popped up in the margins, and
it was that. So this is half-tail. I mean, what an old warrior! It's got a little cluster of 6 scales in the middle.
Yes,
2/3 of the way along the flank.
Yeah, I mean that fish went over 40 pounds.
What is it there, Gary?
38.5.
I mean,
yeah.
For given as it was one of like the most prestigious big fish waters in the country, back when it was at its most famous, it hadn't done many 40s at all.
No,
you're catching carp that are big.
Yeah. Oh, it was big for the time. Yeah, I think Johnny Meacham, the old bailiff on there, he had it at 40. He'd had it at 41 odd month or so before that, when it was still carrying spawn.
Okay.
But yeah, he had little pecks in there that used to go.
Was that still there?
40.
That's a great fish.
Yeah, that sort of. It would have died off a couple of years after I'd been on there. And there was still quite a few of the old ones. The fully scaled had gone by then.
What about the other fully that Johnny Meacham caught, the skinnier one that was another big one, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a couple in there that when I was on there would have been like 28 to 30 sort of size.
Okay.
I think they went on to go sort of bigger as well.
Really?
Yeah, there was some.
And the commons?
Commons, you had the willow and the Chinese common.
Still there? Yeah, at that point?
Yeah, would have been. In fact, that week when I had Roundtail, my mate James, he had, I remember him having the willow at 39 and Chinese at 37.5.
They are peaking these fish at that point, aren't they?
Yeah.
No doubt. Almost when Harefield's dropped off the map a little bit, the fish are actually doing better than ever.
Yeah, I mean, I think the willow went on to scrape a 40. It sort of, peaked at. So it did do 40.
So there's quite a few fish in the upper 30 to 40 pound.
There was some good fish in there. Yeah, quite a lot. There was a lot of 30s in there when I was on there. Yeah,
was there?
Definitely. Yeah.
And how big was Roundtail?
That was 37.10.
So again, another big one.
No, it was big. Yeah, good weight for it as well. Yeah.
Do you think have you had better carp fishing than that in this country?
Probably not. No, I mean the Tolpits fishing was very good.
Yeah.
Probably that and Harefield.
I mean, you have. It's fair to say there. It feels like, in terms of tactics and results, you've leveled up. Like going on to Harefield.
Yeah, I mean it was. Yeah, probably not had better sort of than that. It was a bit. I mean, some of the fishing I did. I mean, can't really talk too much about some of the club water fishing, but I had some very good times on.
I'm sure
fish wise on those, but in terms of what we can,
you've caught the end of the heyday of Harefield, and actually the fish were at their biggest. It seems to me, anyway. Because I think prior to that, you've got like Nelson that went 40, and maybe not a right lot else. During that sort of heyday.
No, I mean,
I could be wrong. People probably say,
I think you're right. At the time, what people probably consider the heyday, when a lot of the famous anglers on there, it was where it was because there were so few big fish around. I mean, 35-pound carp was massive.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably remember Chris Ball used to do his list of 40s that had been caught in a whole year, and there'd be like maybe 10 or 12 fish on there.
Yeah.
And they'd quite often be the same few fish. It'd be like Basil, like Padge Lake 40, Heather, and a handful of others here and there.
But those Harefield fish were famous and big, so in my eyes that's a great bit of angling.
Definitely. I mean, you had video as well, didn't you? Harefield hauling. It was one of the early carp fishing videos. You had
amazing.
that about the place.
It's great that stuff's documented. I certainly had those when I was a kid. I guess you were the same, and probably to then set foot on the place.
I was amazing to see. Yeah.
Was it all boilie fishing, just to recap on that side of things?
Yeah, it would have been mainly boilie fishing.
Still making it yourself at this point?
I was still making it myself. Yeah, that had been fish meals by that stage. Probably soda club mix or fish balls 5 I'd have been on.
Yes, and they liked a fish meal, but despite the bream, you still were able to sort of fish effectively.
Yeah, you could normally feed certain areas like the stick bar. You'd get problems with bream, but a lot of the other areas they were never a massive problem. You sort of catch the odd one rather than being up all night with them.
And you fished through them rather than trying to sort of fish around them, if you like.
Yeah, you weren't getting enough problems to really make you change tactics. I mean, the problem with a lot of sort of when you get so-called nuisance fish, you can end up changing things so much that you avoid them, but you also make your method and rigs less effective for carp as well.
I mean, it must be through gritted teeth that you say the word nuisance fish, Gary. Surely a man of your
well, it's all relative to what I mean. There's times,
carper in that.
I was
going to
say carp.
Yeah,
when I've been tench fishing before, and trying to scare the carp out of my swim. Chucking marker floats out and stuff on Korda Lake to get rid of the carp.
And actually, is it probably the truth that carp are the most difficult nuisance fish to get around? Once they're in, aren't they? They're going to destroy your finely set traps.
And when you've spent a load of money on casters, and chop worm and stuff like that, you don't want them eating it all particularly.
Can we talk a bit about Korda, because I think it's possibly the last lake that you fished for carp and tench that we can even talk about due to publicity reasons.
There's a couple of others unfortunately in between.
That's fine.
I mean the only other one was obviously Chesham Gravel Pit that did a bit on, and that's changed.
You could go back there.
that's got huge now, that fish.
That's 62 pounds.
62, yeah.
Incredible.
The only problem with that one is it's mainly lake exclusives now.
Yes.
So you can't.
You still live very close to that.
I can be there in less than 5 minutes. I could be in the
some
car
really good
park.
perch as well, actually, those lakes.
Yeah, it did them to around £4 some years on the main lake some years back, and then the little lake did some good ones a few years back.
Do you think there are crays in both? I think, aren't there? So perhaps do they tend to do quite well in those lakes?
Yeah, there's probably less crays than there used to be. I mean, back when I was younger fishing it, there was a lot of crayfish in there back then. And some of the perch. I might even done some big falls thinking about it. But
I think Ollie and Nick maybe had a little go over there.
Yeah, they certainly had freeze out the smaller lake. Okay. Yeah, but then it was a big
but a fantastic common, and like I met Christy and the guy who runs that when we did some work down there a couple of winters ago, and what he's done there.
He's done a really good job. Considering, it was always I wouldn't say a dump, but it was. I can imagine the nicest area. There's stuff get dumped around there, and it wasn't locked up. And but now he's done a really good job. All
sorted, and you're reaping the rewards in the shape of one of the biggest commons in the country.
Yeah, and it's a nice looking fish as well. That one.
Do carp still interest you in the way that they did? Can you appreciate a carp still?
That one, if it's one of those lakes you could just, if it's like a syndicate or a season ticket, I would have a ticket on there definitely. Because common that size.
Get a winter ticket, Gary.
I did have a winter ticket last year, but then I got sidetracked with the Thames and river fishing, and I never actually got round to fishing it at all.
So Korda, did you join the lake because of its carp or because of its tench?
That was for the tench. Okay. I was already in the British Carp Study group at the time. I've been in there a few years, and then I applied for a ticket on there when I sort of started getting interested in sort of fishing for other species. I
mean, would it be fair to say it was England's premier tench water for a while?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it was a number of years it was doing big ones as well. I mean, you get other waters, they'll come through, they'll do big tench for a few years, they die out, and you don't hear much about that lake again. Well, Bovington, for instance.
I mean, hugely prolific for a while, but
and that was doing a lot of doubles. I think now it does a lot of tench, but smaller ones.
Talk to us about this tench. That's a Korda fish.
That's 13.6, that one.
Why is it the colour? How would you describe that colouring, Gary?
It's just like mottled. I think it's age.
Really?
It's very old fish, that one,
Tiny little cute head on it, and great proportions. Is that what a big tench should look like? We looked at that one of you earlier.
That one's not really carrying anything. I mean, I think that's been caught. I mean, most of the tench anglers on there finished once they spawned, but I know that's come out at 12 plus, sort of August time. So it's, when it's not carrying spawn. So how important is timing when it comes to tench fishing? It seems like the most incredibly short window if you actually. If you want them at their biggest, which is in the lead up to spawning, then you're pretty much looking from mid-April, depending on the lake. Some lakes sort of start earlier than others in terms of them waking up and having a reasonable chance. Probably through to first or second week in June, a lot of the places when they start spawning. So,
and are you in that bracket? Do you want them at their biggest?
Yeah. I normally fish for them when they're at their biggest. I mean, you can catch them all through the summer, but after spawning, they're normally a little bit tatty. They look skinny. I mean, all right, you get some that are overly carrying spawn, but I think when they're carrying a bit, they're actually look quite nice proportion, nice condition.
And the carp that you caught at Korda, were they all tench fishing?
No, I had some while I actually had to go on there carp fishing.
Did you?
Just before HS2 moved in.
Well, because you felt like you had to do it whilst it was unsullied by HS2.
Yeah. I mean, the owners at the time, I think they were looking. They tried to try to get an idea of what was left in there as well, because they did some netting in there and electro fishing. I don't actually know what they got out at the end. I mean, from what I'd heard, HS2 were looking at just killing everything in there if it came to it, because they didn't want fish floating up here and there. They'd have just come and poisoned the lake, and that'd have been
How
it.
ridiculous. I mean, that's horrendous, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, yeah.
I mean, to say nothing of the HS2 project itself, which must have damaged a lot of waters close to your heart.
I mean, it's done a lot of damage through that. Yeah, I mean, you go down there now, it's just like a building site. It's yeah.
What's Korda Lake like now?
It's got a bridge through the middle of it.
Is it
Like
really?
a temporary bridge where they're building the main thing. Every tree around it pretty much has been hacked down. It's done a lot of damage around that area. I mean, even Savay over the road, the corner where they've gone through Savay, I mean, it looks horrendous.
Do you think it can recover, these lakes? Can they be viable again?
It's a difficult one. They probably, I mean, Korda I don't think ever will, because it's got a bridge through the middle of it. It's never going to be the same again. But places like Savay will. I suppose the thing is, a lot of those lakes were created building the M25. So if it wasn't for some of those projects, they wouldn't be there in the first place. But I mean, HS2, I personally can't see the point of it. The amount of money they've spent.
Even as a man who studied economics, you can't.
No, it just doesn't make any sense.
Nor me. No. A travesty. But you did catch what I think is the best carp in Korda, which is cluster. I think. I mean,
yes,
we've got a picture of that one.
Oh, that one was by accident. That was
it?
fishing. Yeah,
Wow,
that was a nuisance one. I didn't mind too much.
I mean, I think it's a great fish.
Yeah, it's beautiful carp. That one. It's one of my favourite carp I've caught, regardless of how
I can imagine, mate. I can imagine. I mean. What do you find? I mean, there's a picture of it. I mean, upper 30 by that.
It's £40 tent.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. So it's,
what a fabulous one. Love that one.
Yeah, size 14 Guru hook as well.
Yeah. Would this have been caster and worm? Is that your standard?
Cast double rubber caster, fished over caster and worm. Probably some hemp actually back then. I think I was still using hemp. I didn't drop the hemp out of my mix at that stage.
That can't have been that long ago.
2016, I would guess.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah, it'd have been the year I started. I think it was the year I started here.
Right.
So, yeah, 2016, that spring.
I think most carp guys, myself included, you'd think immediately, if I was going to fish for tench, then probably pellet. But you guys use naturals.
Yeah, caster I've just always done really well on.
King,
Caster's brilliant. I mean, chopworm, again, if you've not got problems too many. I mean, Korda had a lot of crayfish in it, but I've seemed to get away with fishing chopworm. Fishing it on the weed, sort of on siltweed, which I think crays don't like so much.
Yeah. How are you presenting on that, though?
Fishing, I'm fishing the method.
Okay.
Sort of method style, fairly short hook length, just sort of folded back into the method ball, and just with like double rubber caster, long hair, so the hook's on the bottom, bait set up.
Okay. That's not crashing into the silkweed then?
No, it seems to flatten it. I think it lands on top. By having the bait sticking outside of it, it almost acts like a bit of a parachute. It always, even just 2 rubber casters sticking out is enough drag that it always seems to land on top.
Okay. And that's what tripped cluster up, was it?
Yeah.
I mean, that must be pretty hairy. How quickly did you know, A, that carp are in the swim, and B, that you've got one on the end?
That one was out the blue. I'd not seen them jumping or anything. But from what I remember, it took about 120 yards of line.
So it tends to be a giveaway, right?
It was out in the middle, and it was weedy as well.
At which point you're thinking, I'm probably not getting this back.
I'd landed quite a few before. I mean, I'd had them to 39 odd before that on the tench gear, and a few other quite a few of the known ones out there on tench gear. Yeah.
Do you set up for tench with a view to landing whatever you hook?
Not really. I mean, I'm on £1.75 test curve rods, £10 line.
So you've got a chance, haven't you?
You've got a chance. I mean, when you think back to what they used to catch £40 carp out of Savay and places like that on in the early days.
£6 main line, for distance work. Yeah.
Exactly. And like all the old Coniflex rods and things like that are probably only £1.75 or £2 test curve. So
how does your, tench fishing with these natural baits, which have become very vogue for carp fishing,
It's really
inform
taken off.
the way that you fish for carp now?
I've not actually done most of the carp fishing I've done in recent years has been more boilie fishing. I mean,
Okay.
The go I had on Korda was fishing over lots of boilies. Just seemed to find them in an area, and the more boilie I put out, the more they got on it.
Which does seem to be a bit of a trend with you, from what you've said about your Harefield fishing. You're not shy when it comes to applying boilie when you think it'll get eaten.
Yeah, if it's getting eaten and you're getting bites, then yeah, definitely I'll put it in. I won't just pile bait in just for the hell of it, but if I'm pretty certain they're in an area, and just trying to capitalise on it as well.
How in terms of the trickiness, where would you place carp in the pantheon of like UK species?
Ooh, difficult one. I mean, they're obviously very wary because of the amount they get fished for. I mean, it's hard to say that any fish is particularly clever. I mean, roach I would probably put pretty much at the top. Certainly river roach, I would say, in terms of difficulty. Just how cautious they are feeding, and
So they seem to change what they want day by day as well, in terms of what they'll accept bait wise, from my experience anyway.
Oh, definitely. I mean, they're just so wary of anything. I mean, even things like rubber casters, I've tried them where you got problems with minnows. They just know there's something wrong with them. You can watch them, even the smaller ones. They eat all the casters you throw in and just leave the rubber one.
So as a sort of a dedicated specimen angler, is it by nature the very biggest carp now that interest you?
Probably not. They've got to be ones that I want to catch look wise.
Okay. And what do they look like now? Because obviously you've had that grounding with all these different fish in the Conn Valley, and
I like those old, like what you call older style. I mean, the problem I've got these days is when you used to go on a lake, if there was a fully scaled in there or a linear, I mean, it was normally called the fully scaled because there was like one of them, maybe two at most. I mean, I think these days there's probably too many scaly ones around that they don't really stand out as.
So you want, and having caught these relatively scaleless Italians over the years, I presume there's still a bit of you, is it? That if they were, not
definitely,
that they exist anymore.
No, it's so hard finding fish that, I mean, and the place as well. It's got to be somewhere I actually want to fish, like where it's not got too many silly rules. The other anglers are sort of good fun to fish with, and you don't get problems on the lake. Sort of.
I mean, is there, being frank, is there room in your diary for English carp fishing?
Probably not. I mean, I don't do a lot of it these days. No. I mean, even when I had to go on Korda, that was like I spent about over the course of 4 or 5 weeks. I fished it quite hard and sort of caught what I wanted.
Is that the way that you fish, though? You know, you can break your year up into intense spells after different species.
I mean, none of it's really planned. It just sort of I don't really plan a year out. I just sort of see what comes along, what I feel like fishing for at the time.
Does that mean that it's impossible for you to spend a year fishing for one type of fish, for instance, or like you just wouldn't do it? You'd rather fish depending on the season.
I'd probably I mean, carp fishing. If I got seriously back into carp fishing, I could probably spend a year fishing for carp, but probably none of the other species because there's so many times a year so that you're not going to catch them, or they're difficult to catch, or it's better fishing for something else. So
I think. Again, to quote Bowler, I'm pretty sure he says in my fishing it's May every season is May, because there's always something that's good to fish for at that time.
Oh, definitely, it doesn't. I mean, even like it can be freezing cold out and all the lake's frozen, you still go out and catch some grayling on a river, as long as it's not in flood. But
obviously the job now must demand that you carp fish quite a lot, but not necessarily in the UK.
No, I mean, I don't do that much overseas. I mean, some of the recce trips I do involve fishing. There's quite a few of them that don't involve fishing. They'll be going and having meetings with like the local angling federations, say in France, to sort of arrange access to a lake. I mean, like Salagoo, when we filmed there, I mean, that took quite a lot of organisation for that.
I mean, how much pride do you get? Because the Salagoo show went down really well, didn't it? How much is that you behind the scenes to start with?
It's one I've been pushing to try and go to for a few years, but I mean the the way Monster Carp was going, we were trying to get bigger and bigger fish every series. Whereas the last couple of series we've done, we sort of pulled that back a bit. They've just got to be. It's still called Monster Carp. She's not going to go and fish for small ones, but as long as they're relatively big.
I mean,
a 40-pounder
yeah,
out of a big wild public lake is
and
still
and this is the public we're appealing to as well. We're not just talking about anglers over here. This is
definitely
you want to get everyone on board, and to them that is a monster.
Yeah, I mean, for a public lake, it's still. Even to a lot of carp anglers, that's still a good fish certainly a 50-pounder. You go to a lake that's thousands of acres somewhere in France or Spain and catch a 50-pounder. It's a really good fish.
Is it your responsibility to come back and say, guys, this is too big an ask?
Yes. I mean, there's not many places that we would write off as not being viable. But at the same time, you can't take too many risks. There's venues in France that I know have got big fish in, but I just wouldn't even entertain as a Monster Carp show. Either because the chances of catching are so low, or some of those venues, the anglers who are doing well on them, I mean, some of them have got silly rules on them, which local anglers are breaking to catch from there. And if you're filming, you can't do that. You've got to stick rigidly to the rules, which again is why we meet up with all the sort of angling federations beforehand.
I kind of get the impression, and we're going to move on to it in a minute, that travel is so important to you, and actually culture, and you probably quite, even if you're not fishing, you're eating, with the locals. You're trying to take on board some of the local flavour. Like, how important is that in your life?
Oh, very much. I mean, I love travelling anyway. Some of the places I go to, I'd still enjoy it even if I wasn't fishing there. The fishing's almost a bonus. Even places like France. I mean, I love spending time in France. Unfortunately, I'm rubbish when it comes to speaking foreign languages. That's one thing that just doesn't.
That's such a shame.
I know.
Imagine,
I hate
shouldn't
it.
you really be like James Bond, though? Just like fluent in about 10 different things.
I wish I was. I say numbers work for me, but languages have just never been
right.
Just never worked that well for me. I'll speak a little bit of French.
I was going to say, you must be able to get by.
I can understand a lot more than I can speak.
And I suppose French is a good one for some of your global stuff as well, because you're going to countries, I presume some African countries, etc., where it's understood at least. Yeah,
there's definitely French sort of influence, or Spanish should be a good one as well.
Yeah. Let's talk a bit about your globe-trotting, because whether you're a carp angler or not, you can't fail to be inspired by some of the crazy fishing that you've done. In terms of who inspired you, a couple of names spring to mind. I'm going to throw them out there. Obviously, John Wilson.
Yep.
Joe Taylor.
Yeah.
Because obviously there are, like I said to you before, there are very few people who've done the sort of fishing that you've done. So how do you get started in this kind of crazy world of globe-trotting?
Well, I'm going to jump in with crazy world and globe-trotting, because that just sums it up for me perfectly.
I don't even know what that is.
That's a red tail catfish. That's
it's yellow.
I'm sorry, Rich. I couldn't help myself.
No, it's fine, mate. You jump in.
That's from Brazil, that one. Yeah.
What a mad-looking fish.
Yeah, that's crazy, isn't it?
Again, Gal, how do you go about catching something like that? Because look at it. It's ridiculous.
Is a catfish wherever you go, or are there local methods and traditions that you tend to sort of observe?
No, they do. They tend to be fairly similar. So, I mean, these ones are a lot more predatory than the whales, and some of the other ones are as well.
In the sense that they're on the move and they hit a moving bait.
They take a big live. Yeah, I mean, you'll catch whales on live bait, obviously on the rivers, but you'll catch them on pellet as well. Whereas these, they tend to be less scavengers.
Yeah.
I mean, these will pick up a dead bait.
You look like you're well in the jungle there as well.
Yeah, that was on the Rio Araguaia, which is sort of centre of Brazil. I mean, it wasn't so bad that we were actually staying in. It's quite heavily fished there. We're staying in lodges, sort of alongside the river. So you're out for the day on the boats, come back to a lodge, fairly basic lodge, but you still got somewhere to come back to.
I mean, it must chill you to the bone, though, when there's news reports like we had this year with the journalist that was killed out in Brazil. Admittedly, probably deep in the Amazon, but shit happens out there, Gary, doesn't it?
I've always looked at it, probably, if you looked at it statistically, your probably biggest risk is either driving to the airport around the M25 or on the roads in one of those countries to actually getting kidnapped by someone or something happening.
Yeah.
I love how that's your justification for it. No, I'll be fine. The M25.
But how many people?
No, you are.
There's
yeah,
one journalist died in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah, there's probably lots of British people have died on the roads in Brazil.
For sure. It's just it's obviously when they make
it makes the news.
When it makes the news,
yeah.
I would immediately think of someone like you out there deep in the jungle.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rich. Something I wanted to ask you, Gal. Where would you consider then to have been the most dangerous place that you have fished?
Probably Venezuela.
Yeah. Okay.
I would say. Yeah, we flew into Caracas, which I think is more murders a year than a lot of war zones get. Pretty much advised not to leave the hotel while we were there.
Does that kind of does that excite you, or do you go with a bit of nerves?
I don't really get nervous. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. I don't take unnecessary risks.
No, of course.
But, if you're going to go to these places, you just sort of go with the flow. Really.
What did you go there to fish for?
That was fishing for peacock bass. But again, once we got away from the city, once you get out into the jungle, you don't get any problems at all. Okay. It's pretty safe, other than
you must really want to catch a peacock bass, though.
Yeah, I've been to Colombia as well for them. That was
I've
good.
Got one here, to be fair.
I mean, they are incredibly colourful creatures. These peacocks.
Oh, they're beautiful.
How do you fish for those?
That's an incredible looking fish.
That was lure fishing. Yeah.
Do they come up and smash it? Are they top water lure?
That one was actually on like a subsurface one. But you can catch him on top waters as well. Yeah, I think that was £16 that one.
I don't imagine you're going back to the hotel at night here.
No, that was staying in the jungle. In fact, that trip I probably had one of my worst experiences, which is when I found out I was badly allergic to wasp venom.
Oh. Which is really serious, right?
Yeah, I ended up in anaphylactic shock in the jungle, so in a tent, which was quite bad.
Medical help available? Or?
No, nothing. No. I've always reacted a bit swelling up.
Your throat didn't swell up though. You were able to breathe.
Well, throat and face all swelled up, but I was able to breathe. I only got stung once on the wrist. We had literally going along the river, a swarm of them came out the jungle at us. Got one sting on the wrist.
That's like my worst nightmare.
Oh,
something like that.
It was
There must have been a moment where you'd have thought, "Oh, right, this is." Before you'd got stung, like, did you see them come out of the trees, kind of thing, like a swarm? Or?
You just heard them coming. The next minute, the guides are sort of they were scared of them as well. These big red wasps.
How big are we talking?
They're sort of like that sort of size,
like 2.5, 3 inches.
Yeah.
Bigger than a hornet. Bigger than a hornet.
Stung once, and within half hour, everything was swollen and heart rate through the roof.
Really? So do you need to get a shot of adrenaline or something? Is that?
Oh, there's no way of getting. It was right on dusk. We were literally heading back to the
camp.
sit
it out. I
was laying in a tent.
Were you feverish? Did you have hallucinations or anything like that?
No, but you could feel your heart and hear your heart. It was going that fast.
The adrenaline's kicked in. Right.
Sort of, everything was.
Was there a point where, without getting too morbid, so to speak, was there a point where you thought this is going a bit south?
Yeah, I could tell it wasn't good. Yeah, but again, there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, panicking more than
understandably, but
makes it worse. Make it worse.
Like Rich said, you're sitting it out with no help. I mean, anybody would at some point think, could do with some help here.
But there's no way of getting it. You're so remote there. I mean, the river we were on is dangerous rapids. So there's no way of going by boat anywhere. Mm-hmm. It's so thick, the jungle. We had a sat phone, but you can't get a helicopter to come in to get airlifted out. Daytime, you'd have no problem to come and land on a beach somewhere. But they're not going to come in at night. I now carry EpiPens with me.
Okay.
Because I got tested when I came back. I think I'm something like 60 times more allergic to wasp venom than the average.
Wow.
Found out since. So I now carry pens with me.
You didn't get stung by a normal wasp. It was a big boy.
Yeah.
Well, it was a bad one as well. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. A normal wasp, I don't think. Well, you never know.
No.
I'll take them fishing with me in this country just to be on the safe side.
Dare you tell your parents at this point that you've nearly died out in the jungle?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those. It happened and recovered. So
by the time you had recovered,
felt
it was okay.
rough for a day afterwards. And
really, I bet you still went out fishing though.
I did. Yeah, I was back on the boat the next day. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm going to say they're very beautiful fish, but I'm not sure it's worth that.
They're good.
Why are they so desirable?
I think the colours as well. They're beautiful. They're one of the nicest looking freshwater fish.
So do you have like a list of fish that you really want to catch?
Yeah, I mean, I've got, I mean, they're that's something I wanted. I mean, I think there's 16 or 17 different species of peacock bass, something like that. I mean, that's the one that grows biggest.
Can we? I mean, if we're on the sort of the perch, effectively, Topes, just fire up a picture of that Nile perch, because I think that was the most, to me, that was the most impressive fish that you'd caught.
Yeah, that's
and these
definitely
are
up there.
These are a species that demand complete commitment, don't they?
There's not many of them about now. I mean, Lake Nasser used to do 100-pounders all the time.
When Joe Taylor was going over there.
Yeah, I mean, there was companies off guaranteeing 100. If you didn't get 100, you get a free trip going back out there. But then with commercial fishing on there, they wiped it out in a few years, I suppose.
It would just be heartbreaking for guys like yourself who've, presumably grown up in images of people.
I missed Nasser. I was Marseille fishing at the time, so I never actually got round to fishing it.
Is it Uganda or somewhere now they go for the perch?
That's where that was. Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, that's where I was. Murchison Falls.
Find that one, Topes. It's just I mean,
it's a spectacular place to go and fish for them.
one?
Anyway,
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
What a ridiculous that looks.
do you know what that looks like? Have you seen
It's
the
like
guy?
the action man.
Yeah, it does.
Holding it. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it does. I thought that when I saw the picture.
The tail, it looks like a normal sized fish with a tiny human behind it.
It was ridiculous. I mean, it was just me and the guide as well, so we couldn't do a lot with it. Luckily there's a tree behind.
I actually like the fact that you're struggling to get anything like a picture that we'd understand as a normal cat shot.
Yeah, I mean, there you wouldn't normally go in the water for cat shots.
Well, because of
Nile crocodiles,
Right.
like 14, 15 foot, really aggressive as
so
well.
slightly smaller than the perch, of course.
Yeah,
about half
they're-
the size.
How do you catch a fish like that?
That was just fishing on a live bait.
Under a float? Is that
No, ledgering. It was on the edge of a drop off.
drop off from what into what? Is it we're talking?
Basically, you had a load of papyrus grass,
Right.
which I know you normally get tilapia. They like that.
They're the bait fish.
Bait fish. Then it's sort of like 2 metre, 1.5, 2 metre ledge, and it dropped up to 4 or 5 metres.
Oh, so not super deep or anything.
No, I was actually fishing in the less than 2 metre stuff.
So a fish like that, you're going to have a shout of knowing when that's around, aren't you?
We didn't see it. You'd think it can't have had much water over the top of it.
No,
When
not
it
in
was
2
moving.
meters. I mean,
Nah.
what is that? A meter thick?
Yeah, it's got
Top
to
to-
be
yeah,
easy. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think they sit in the deeper water, but
Looking
they're
up.
very close to the food source.
I mean, the heads,
so-
the eyes are mounted quite high on the head, aren't they? Like they're
yeah,
probably
they are
gonna-
very predatory.
Yeah.
Gary,
I mean,
sorry, is that the biggest fish you've ever caught of any species?
no, I've had bigger. What have I had bigger than that?
Because I think you've got
that's
that's
199
£199.
pounds, isn't it? Yeah.
199. I've had. I mean,
that must be estimated, though, right? It's-
no, that was weighed.
Was
That
it?
was actually yeah.
How do you even do that?
So there was a tree behind us, so we just got a big branch through the scales,
Yeah.
one end on the fork of a tree, and then I had a
Okay.
big sling with me.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
literally, the fish was you just hold it.
I mean,
up above
nobody
the water.
makes slings big enough to put £199 Nile perch in.
The catfish ones, you'd be
Are
surprised.
they?
They fit in quite easy because the catfish are so long.
Yeah.
That fitted in quite fairly easy in a catfish sling.
I mean,
we
you could
managed
get
to
your
a
head
weight
in
on
its
it.
mouth.
Oh, it's huge. The mouth on them is just ridiculous.
So when they
They just engulf.
do they hit them hard? These
They just
fish.
engulf everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not using big tilapia a lot of the time. Sort
Uh-huh.
of, you can put they'll take big baits, but it just cuts down your hooking ratio.
Right.
I mean, fishing circle hooks with them as well for conservation.
Okay.
'Cause it's all very much sort of conservation.
Are these quite a
orientated
rare
now.
fish now then?
They are. I think that's the biggest that's been out for over a year when I had that. So it does one, maybe 2 fish that sort of size each year. So I just got incredibly lucky, really.
And I mean, I've got to ask, when you hit these things, what happens?
That went tearing off. I mean, at one point it did try and jump after about. I mean, we did have a crocodile as well in the area. So once it had taken the bait and gone off downstream, we quickly followed it in the boat to get away from the croc
Right.
because they will come and hit them when you're playing them if you're not careful.
I mean, even a croc's going to struggle with something like that, surely.
They'll still have a go.
Will they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was. I think one of the fish up near the record, whatever that was, 114 kilos or something. That got taken by a croc. It
I
killed
think
it,
when
killed
you
it
were
during the fight.
on the Guru podcast, I'd love to see if I can find the picture, but you had a picture of a croc that
That's right.
had
Yes.
got the better of a Nile perch.
Yeah,
It
that fish
quite
was
a-
about 60, 65 kilos. It was adding.
That
its
was a
jaws.
menacing
Yeah,
picture in
yeah.
itself.
Yes, they will take big uns. But yeah, it went off downstream, sort of followed it, and I say it tried to jump a couple of times and could see it was big, but it was only when we got it alongside that
I mean, this
saw how big it is.
This kind of, in inverted commas, hobby that you have, going fishing for these crazy things, it must cost you a fortune. It must cost a lot of time and a lot of effort, planning, and these are things that you presumably have to plan your year around.
Oh, definitely. I mean, Uganda particularly. I mean, that because there's not much fishing there. There's a few boats there, but the company and the lodges, the company that does the fishing and the other lodges there, they're mainly set up for safari stuff. So they're charging safari
money,
prices
right,
to stay
yeah,
there. And then on top of that, you're paying for the boat and the guide and park entry. So yeah, that is sort of one of the more expensive.
Sorry, I've just found a bigger fish than your 200-pound Nile perch.
Oh yeah, that's a Gillam's one. Yeah.
So this is more accessible fishing.
That's definitely more. I mean, that's sort of it's something I'll go and do as a holiday. I enjoy it out there. It's a bit of fun.
Yeah.
I know quite a few people that have said, "Oh, it's Thailand. I've never done." Then when they actually go and do it, they absolutely love it.
What is this crazy beast that we've got?
That's a Mekong catfish.
Right.
I mean, that was estimated at about 250. I think that one, but yeah. And the fight of them's ridiculous as well.
So where would these live if they were in the wild?
They would be in the Mekong River.
So rivers, yeah.
Yeah, and they're mainly filter feeders as well. So sort of like tiny invertebrates. So trying to catch one.
They just look a bit like a whale shark now you mentioned it.
Yeah, they've got that, yeah. But they do just filter loads of stuff. So I think you'd struggle to target one in the wild. It's only where they've been captively bred and in lakes where they're
you have
pellets.
fished for arapaima in the wild?
Yeah, I've caught arapaima in the wild.
These are fish that are in Gillam's, but also exist.
I've caught big ones at Gillam's. I think again 150 kilo odd. They estimate that, but my favourite one would be wild captures of
150 kilos.
Yeah,
so that's much bigger again than the Mekong.
Yeah, about 330 pounds.
Yeah. So is that your biggest fish then?
Yeah, it would be. Yeah.
But what does fishing for arapaima in the wild entail? So here's a picture.
Oh, that's a big one. Yeah. I mean, you're fishing. You mainly catch them off of the main river. I mean, you do get them in the main river, but they're really hard to find. There'll be like channels or lagoons off the main river. A lot of sight fishing. You'll see them come up. Do
they take air?
They're air breathers. So they come up every sort of like 15, 20 minutes or so for a gulp of air. So you see them then.
That is a living fossil, isn't it?
Oh, they are. They're incredible things. I mean, they can live when there's almost no water left, and because they're air breathers, it can be stagnant, and they'll come up and. As long as they got some
do they
water.
eat a bit of everything? They fruit eaters as well. Those are
they mainly fish, or they'll take small mammals if there's anything sort of swimming around like frogs.
Jack Russell or something.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, you see when the mouths look small on them, but they almost like can open properly. Yeah.
And how big do these things go?
They're supposed to go like 500 pound, but potentially.
Yeah.
It's one of those. I don't know what the biggest official one is.
Where was this one?
That was caught in Guyana,
right,
on the Essequibo River.
And you're with a couple of local guides?
They're just like local Amerindians,
okay.
That sort of from one of the villages.
And what do they think of your of you coming to their country to fish for these fish?
I mean, it must be strange to them. I mean, I think that was the first trip they had ever done, those guys.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The guy on that river was just starting up, sort of doing fishing trips, and Joe Taylor was speaking to him, and we were I think we were the first group he ever had out there.
So you and Joe's a big influence for you. I think I did ask that, and then we got sidetracked.
Yes, no, Joe has been. Yeah, I mean John Wilson, obviously.
Yeah.
The Marseille stuff relates back to that, and Jeremy Wade and Paul Boot as well.
Yes.
I mean, Somewhere Down the Crazy River. Still my favourite book.
Yeah, and actually that I think they got malaria. I think his description of catching malaria
Jeremy
was pretty
Wade got
crazy.
malaria in the Congo. Yes.
Yeah.
And
that in a way prepares you for what can happen on these things.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest. I don't actually take anti-malarials when I go away, just because quite often you're spending quite a lot of time in these places. They make you feel rough just taking the things in the first place.
Right.
So they certainly make me feel rough. Even things like Malarone.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've got quite a lot of friends as well in these countries now, and malaria. It's still something you definitely don't want to catch, but I'm less concerned about it than I used to be, because I mean some of them they get it almost yearly. It's just like a normal thing. As long as you,
Yeah.
it's treated it quickly. That's if you
Okay.
leave it, that's when you
And what?
get problems, or you can get obviously complications. So
Yeah. And what about living in the, living in the jungle in these places? What's that like? What do you like about that?
I mean, quite a lot of it is a necessity. I wouldn't say you're necessarily comfortable a lot of the time.
Yeah.
You're getting bitten.
Which bit do you enjoy then? Should I say?
No, you're waking up in some spectacular places.
I mean, I'm not sure I'd get to sleep. Never mind waking up, mate. If I'm asleep in the jungle.
Yeah, I mean, it depends where you sleep.
Are you in hammocks? Yeah.
Hammocks I struggle with because I like sleeping on my side. I can manage a week in a hammock, but anything much longer, my back starts going. So then either camp bed or on the floor. I've spent quite a lot of time.
Oh, Gary. On the floor in the jungle.
Yeah, that's probably less preferable because you get tarantulas and all sorts of other
Obviously,
stuff,
yeah.
snakes, and yeah.
Have you ever woken up with a tarantula on your face?
Not on my face. No, I've had one that was in a hammock actually. It was on the inside of the mesh, mosquito mesh.
That's just
of my hammock.
Oh,
Really?
couldn't-
Yes.
What do you do in that situation?
Just let it crawl onto my hand and walked away and
sort of like
let it go.
escorted him out.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, yeah.
Just so
A lot of
laid
those things, you
back.
try and pick them up, they'll bite you. If you just crawl onto you,
Okay.
they're less
Just for
bothered.
context, I've just done a quick Google, but that seems to be the biggest arapaima caught.
230 key.
Yeah, that'd be about
That was just under
Palm
485
Tree,
pounds.
Palm Tree Lagoon. Yeah,
Do you know it? Is this a commercial as
it's
well?
quite a small commercial up near Bangkok. Yeah,
How do they
Bangkok.
stay that big in these waters?
There's a lot of food quite often in those, and they're getting fed all the time as well.
I mean,
like whole
they'll eat
chickens and
pellets and they eat pellets and all that sort of stuff, and
Right.
they grow really quick
Ridiculous,
as
isn't
well.
it? Yeah.
How do you get an arapaima from its natural habitat to Thailand, for instance?
They're captive bred out there. There's
Right.
quite a big. They farm them basically for food, or
really?
for
They're
these
eaten?
fisheries. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
really nice to eat. I mean, yeah,
Are
Gillam's
they?
have got it on the menu down there because they're not that long lived either. They don't like being caught. They're one of those species.
So there's a high turnover of arapaima.
They'll
in these
lose a
fisheries.
few. Yeah,
Yeah.
they'll always be replacing them, those fisheries, whatever they're.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're in the depths of the jungle, you haven't got your Coleman and your ridge monkey frying pan.
Yep.
Like, what are you eating?
Sometimes eating some of the fish. I mean, the last trip I did, we were eating less than we normally would be because it was difficult getting
any
decent
food?
fish. You could catch piranha, which aren't particularly appetising. They're full of bones.
Right.
They're all right. I'll eat them if you're starving, but
What's your favourite piranha recipe, Gary?
yeah, they do like piranha soup or something like that.
Oh, it just sounds
yeah,
sounds
smoked fish is all right.
Is
I
it?
quite happily eat smoked fish?
Can
like
you
any of
smoke
those.
a fish out in the
Yeah, they'll just build a fire and just put it above it on sticks.
in like a lattice work of sticks? Type
Yeah,
thing, or
pretty
just
much.
stab them down the.
No, just on lattice worth of sticks above. They're really good. I mean, the local guys, you see what they can build, and
right.
just with a machete, they're
Yeah,
so good at like they knock a table up or something. Or,
Yeah.
yeah,
What's
and
your-
quickly as well.
What's your like go-to jungle delicacy if you could have one thing from one of your?
From out there, peacock bass is actually really nice to eat. As
Oh,
well.
so you eat the bloody things after
Eating a few of the smaller ones,
Yeah.
yeah, big ones not taking. Iguana is quite nice.
Okay. What like tastes like chicken?
It's darker meat than chicken. It's not
Yeah.
got a lot of flavour.
Right.
It's really clean meat though.
Is
It's-
it?
Yeah, you eat the tail. It's just like
Oh, I imagine quite thick and muscular. So you just like a fit like a loin. You know, like a.
yeah, it's a little bit chewier than chicken. But
Yeah.
it's pretty good. Yeah.
We've got a picture up. Talk us through this picture up Toby's found on your Facebook.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry, I
that
meant to
was-
throw this up when you were talking about the hazards on the bank, if you like.
What-
Oh, that was under my bed.
What is
on
that?
the last trip?
Describe that for
It's
people who can't
just
see.
It's a scorpion. I'm not sure exactly what type.
It doesn't look ideal. It doesn't look like a
look
nice.
friendly, does it?
No.
Not a nice one.
No,
It's-
I'm walking about barefoot a lot of the time on these things as well. Once I'm out like,
Okay.
in the jungle, and yeah, you definitely wouldn't want to tread on one.
No, I mean that's a big knife as well as you know.
It's reasonable size, but yeah,
In the Mick Dundee tradition of having knives, that's a knife.
I've got a bigger one. That's a smaller of the two survival
Yeah.
knives.
Yeah.
But no, interesting. As soon as they get on that cold steel blade, it just sat there, didn't move.
Did you just escort him off
I
the property?
just moved it and
Yeah.
went away from where we
Do
were.
they go in your shoes?
You want to check everything, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, shoes, clothes, sleeping bag. yeah, I found them in clothes before. You definitely don't want to be
So-
putting something on.
I mean, we've talked about all of the things that could go wrong. Like, what are the moments during these trips that you look forward to the most?
Look forward to the most. It's hard because the whole thing is normally fairly epic. I mean, actually getting to where you're going, to the river, or because the travel bit.
Are we talking about those planes with the land on water, that kind of thing? Or?
I've never done float planes. I mean, the latest trip I had to charter a little plane to get me in there, like a 4-seater, which was far smaller than anything
I
I've.
would not be getting in a charter.
No,
It looked like a
Certainly.
toy.
Couldn't get me in that.
It was like a toy on the runway. It really was.
no. No.
Are you basically starring your own like adventure movies, don't you?
It's not far off for that. But that was really good. I'll definitely do that again, like the flying bit.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, we came into land, banked over the river, and where we dropped it, you couldn't even see the runway, landing strip in the jungle. You just
Right.
dropped into the trees next to me. You've touched down and just on a strip of grass.
I mean, this is life for people, isn't it? You can
Yeah.
get pretty carried away with our comfy lives, but you know, being in a tiny plane, you've got to trust the pilot that it's
the
presumably
pilot
something he
flies
does
on
all
back
the time.
and forth
Yeah.
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
how often are you boated into these remote locations?
Most of the time by boat. Yeah, lot of it, yeah. I mean, like the last trip I did, flew in there and then came all the way back down by river, which was probably, I don't know, around 30 hours or something by boat to get back to anywhere.
Can you get
And
on,
had to get around a waterfall.
Can you
as
still
well.
get on the gram out there? Get on Instagram. Have you got any 5G?
Didn't have anything on that trip the whole time I was there. Even the sat phone, we were having to drive about in the boat to get enough satellites for the satellite phone to work.
Right.
Just to
So
let the guy
is that
who
part of
does
it,
the
you know,
trips know we're alive. So.
Yeah, I mean, you're in complete isolation. Does that mean you can be totally focused? I mean, whenever I go on holiday, I always provokes a slight feeling of like you end up reflecting on your life back home quite a lot. I mean, are you just focused on your fishing? Is it time to think? Like, are you enjoying it? You know, these moments.
It's nice to be away from email and everything, like all other interruptions like that. I mean, it's not very often. I mean, when I go on holiday, if I get an email come through, I have to reply to it.
Yeah.
I can't just say, no,
Okay.
I'm on holiday, I'll leave it till I get back.
Yeah.
I'll
You
reply to it when I get it. So it's nice to have no interruptions.
Are these trips going to go on and on and on? Are you going to be Joe Taylor? Are you going to be going in your 70s or
I would
whatever?
hope so if
Yeah.
I make it to my 70s. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, you're showing no signs of stopping just yet.
Not yet, no.
Are there species that, I mean, you must have a list of species that you haven't yet caught.
Definitely. I mean, Goliath tigerfish is top of it.
Oh, one of the real glamorous ones as well. You haven't
yeah.
even been.
No, I've been trying to go for the last 3 years, and then with COVID
Yeah.
and other things coming along, I'm hoping to go this year in August. But it all depends. I mean, there's been quite heavy fighting there again. It's basically a war zone you're going into.
Can't you find them somewhere quiet?
It's the only place you find them in the Congo.
It's just
Yeah.
there's a few. They
Yeah.
look vicious, don't they?
Oh, they are. I mean, the teeth on them is ridiculous.
These are, I mean, perhaps they were the sort of emblem of the somewhere down the crazy river, weren't they? They were the.
Oh,
stuff
they were.
that-
Yeah, it was like half about the Marseille, half about those.
They kind of Jeremy Wade and Paul Book sort of, if you excuse the pun, cut their teeth fishing for these fish deep in
very much. Yeah.
in the heart of Africa, right?
Mm.
I mean,
Oh, there's Jakob with one. Yeah, Jakob Wagner with one. Yeah.
but you can.
I mean, there's always been problems. These countries, there's been stuff
Yes.
going on for years.
Why risk it to go?
I mean, a lot of it's well away from where you'll be fishing. It just happens at the moment. Well, in the last month or so, there's been problems more in the sort of Kinshasa where you fly into, and in the region where you'd be fishing. So just waiting to see if it's possible.
Do you? There's a weir there. Did you say? You
That's
go
with
alone
a
or-
mate
as
who's
a mate,
sort of
right.
been looking at doing it. He lives out in Ghana, so he's
Oh,
from
okay.
Africa anyway. Yeah.
Yes. So Goliath tigerfish, that's probably number one. What we're talking about other fish? Have you've caught Iberian barbel, stuff like that?
No,
They're more mundane, clearly, compared to a
I would have a go for them. The Tigris barbel were higher on the list than those.
Okay.
But that's,
what is that? Is that like
it's Iran mainly.
Yeah.
So at the moment, it's just obviously no go with
What
visas.
about, and again, like, you know, Taiman, have you caught those?
I've had taimen, yes.
Would that be like Russia or?
Eastern Russia, I caught those. Yeah, Mongolia, I'd like to go to just to sort of see the place. But yeah, Eastern Russia, I did 2 trips out there. One
And these are like, to all intents and purposes, a ginormous long salmon, aren't they? That
They
kind
are,
of
yeah,
look.
yeah. It's just like a huge sort of salmony trout looking thing. Yeah,
Is that an enjoyable one for you, the taming? Or
yeah, it's good. Yeah, good fun that was.
Yeah.
The first trip I've had them to.
any vodka?
Lots of vodka. Yeah, they drink all the time.
Do they?
Yeah, it's their homemade stuff as well.
Oh god,
They
just gonna knock
it's
your
just like
socks off.
spirit with mixed 50-50 with water. Chuck some lemons in it.
Really?
Leave it a couple of days, and that's.
Oh,
And
I
they
do
insist
like
as
vodka,
well.
but Jesus,
you'll
I
get up
think
at like 4 a.m. Go fishing. It's like before you go, you must drink, and they're like pouring shots going. I don't even drink normally, and yeah.
Oh, you must have some fairly hazy
sort of
memories of
wobbling
your
about-
first
yeah,
time.
exactly,
Do you
yeah.
even remember your first time?
No, probably not. No. That it is.
So far we've got Congo, Russia, and
Congo and Iran.
and
yeah,
Iran.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I can see why you haven't necessarily ticked off some of these fish.
No, I mean Iran. I've got a contact out there. I've got Dutch friends that have gone out there with no problems at all. But it's just with a British passport at the minute. And I think even for anyone at the moment with everything going on, you'd be a bit wary. But
Yeah. I mean, what's the end goal here? Like, are you just accumulating pictures? Are you ticking boxes, or is it something more sort of fundamental for you?
there's no real. It's just stuff I want to go and do. Really, countries I either want to go and see or fish species.
Yeah.
Sort of to go and
I mean, all of that sort of stuff is. I'm going to say that most people aren't going to do that. It's
Probably not.
pretty.
No. There's a very
unusual.
small group of people. You tend to bump into the same people and swap info.
But one thing that I do want to get from this, I want to touch on it at least, is the fact, to bring us back down to earth, is this idea that carp anglers are now diversifying quite a lot more. We had the sort of year of the perch, when everyone seemed to be getting out of
everyone's
perch.
yeah.
What do you think, given as we're now in the winter and this will be coming out in a couple of weeks, what sort of fish should carp anglers be looking out for in terms of that are targetable during the winter when perhaps the carp fishing is slow?
I mean, obviously pike spring to mind straight away because it's something you can pretty much use the same gear other than tying a wire trace on and chucking a dead bait out. As long as people obviously know how to unhook them, that's
Similar pace to carp fishing as well, potentially. Like
Yeah.
you're gonna have your stove and your chair, and
yeah, you can do all
if
that.
you want to
yeah,
do it that
yeah,
way,
you can do all that. You can either go for a day, you can go for a weekend, you can I mean, barbel fishing as well. Certainly on the bigger rivers like the Trent or the Thames. I mean, that's very, very similar now to. I mean,
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily use carp gear for it.
But you
'cause
could.
You could if you if you didn't have any lighter rods, you could quite easily chuck out stuff on carp rods.
And again, you're probably not having to change your rigs or your baits or anything for that, are you?
No, you could pretty much chuck the same thing out and catch.
But the point being, perhaps that because they live in a river or because of the way that they are as a species, they're more catchable during the winter than probably carp are.
Yeah, as long as you've got warmer weather. I mean, obviously,
We now get
as
this,
we're
though, don't
doing
we?
this, it's
Yeah.
freezing cold, and you wouldn't be going out. Even on the Trent, where it's high stock, you'd probably be struggling. But you get any warmer sort of spells of weather, you can
I mean,
catch.
it does seem like now that we certainly around Christmas, on the lead up to Christmas and around Christmas, we now get warm, wet weather, don't we? It seems
Always
certainly
seems, yeah,
to be a
certainly
bit
the
of a
last couple of
trend.
years have been, yeah.
So that is the sort of time you'd go for barbel, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, if the river's rising, it's not always that good. You want it when it sort of settles, especially if it's the first flood of the year, because you get so much rubbish coming through, especially like November time, all the leaves and everything else. It can make it almost impossible to keep a rig in the water. But once the level settles or starts dropping, that's sort of the time to get out.
And do the lads need to? What would you take bait wise? Some people pre-bait for barbel, but it's not common, is it?
No, I mean, it's something I might do on my local river Colne. Even then, though, I don't do it that often. It's more trickling a bit of bait in at the end of a session. But I mean, a lot of these bigger rivers, like pellets, as good as anything.
Yeah, and pretty instant as well.
Yeah, you
Because
get bites.
Is it the action of the river, like drawing off the flavour, that allows the barbel to find you a bit more efficiently than perhaps?
It probably must be something like that. Yeah, I mean, you could get a scent trail going off of some pellets, PVA bag of pellets or whatever.
And I think the thing
feeder.
The thing for me is, I can't always get too much time. Carp fishing, I might get one night a week, which is kind of my standard, but I don't, I could certainly chuck in a couple of evenings. It's much more flexible, isn't it? I think if you want
definitely.
time on the bank, albeit in the dark, but barbel are doable in a couple of hours, 3 hours, 2 or 3 hours in the evening.
I definitely sort of think you can stop off after work if there's someone on the way home from you. Have a few hours fishing. Same with chub. I mean, you're fishing at around the sort of time when it's good for them as well, around that sort of dusky time and into the first couple of hours of darkness.
Do the conditions differ in terms of what is most favourable for chub and barbel?
Yeah, I mean, chub, you're probably looking almost the opposite. If it's clearer water, you'll catch them in. I mean, you'll catch them in warm water, but you'll catch them in cold as well. Temperature's less important. Although even that with chub, although you'll catch them in very cold conditions, you don't want a big drop in temperature.
Okay.
It tends to just knock everything on the head when you get that massive temperature drop.
Yeah. But again, the tactics, like 12 millers, that kind of thing, or bigger baits. How would you?
Yeah, I mean, chub again, pellet or paste. I mean, I use milk protein baits a lot myself. I still make my own, but you don't. A lot of rivers you don't need to do that. You'll catch shorter hairs for chub, or even side hooking. Can
you catch both? Chub, could you set up to go and catch chub and barbel, by just simply using a shorter hair? Yeah,
you'll catch both on a shorter hair. Yeah, I mean, quite often if I'm using longer hairs, it's if the chub aren't necessarily the size I want to be catching, and they're a problem.
Okay, you get a lot of rattles, and
you put a longer hair on, you'll get rattles off them, but you won't actually hook them and disturb the swim. Okay. Especially on some of the smaller rivers, if you catch a chub, it can ruin you. That can be it. That's your bite out of that swim. There's so much disturbance. You're not going to catch another fish.
And with your milk protein, are you baiting? Are you feeding those fish?
I tend to use that again on places I'm fishing regularly, like down on the local bit of the
it's
Colne.
Supposed to be like a good way to really dominate a stretch, isn't it? By feeding small amounts of this stuff.
You don't need a lot of it at all. No, I mean, a couple of winters ago, there was a couple of other people fishing the stretch, and once I got the milk protein going in there, it just seemed to no one catching anything else. Isn't it?
I mean, is it a secret recipe? I'm not suggesting that we expose it.
It has got some, but it's something I've used for a long time.
Giving them a strong flavour? Is it that sort of?
No, it's quite low flavours. Is it? Yeah. I think with that, you don't want anything too strong. You want them to recognise it, but not to sort of associate it with danger.
Become wary of it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean they tend to blow quicker, those sort of baits, if they're very strong flavour.
It's like everything's speeded up. It's like carp fishing, but quicker, isn't it? Because things happen in a shorter time scale. Like you'll catch a proportion of the fish on that stretch quite quickly, presumably, potentially.
Yeah, once you get them on the bait.
At which point they could then become wary of it if it's too strong. Is that the vibe?
Yeah, I mean, with the one I use, I've gone back to stretches, and again, where I've sort of fished it in the past and established it, and you go back and catch straight away on it again. It's sort of, even a couple of years later. So
chub and barbel, and obviously we've talked a little bit about perch as having been one of the fish that carp anglers like. What would be your left field suggestion that carp anglers would enjoy, in terms of the species that perhaps don't get the coverage that they should?
What would they go for? I mean, obviously, although I was saying that, a lot of carp anglers don't like catfish today. I mean, catfish would be the obvious one for the fighting, how hard they fight.
Yeah.
But I know quite a lot of carp anglers don't necessarily appreciate it.
They're perhaps not so widespread as well, I guess, in terms of being able to find somewhere with them in.
No, I mean, these days, they've a lot more widespread, don't they? I mean, there's quite a lot of day ticket waters now, sort of all over the country that have got them in. So.
And tench, we talked about, again, similar approach, but probably the wrong season. They're clashing with your best carp fishing, aren't they, I suppose?
Yeah, you want to be fishing for those, say that sort of latter half of April through to mid-June, really.
I mean, personally speaking, the whole chub and barbel thing does fit really well with sort of working life and family life. You can really be quite flexible with that, can't you? You could fish the whole night if you wanted to, but you don't need to.
I know. I mean, I sometimes used to go for an hour on the way home.
Really?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, especially when I was working in London. I mean, I'd get the train home and I'd drive him past the Colne on the way. So
can we have a look at Tolpits? Gary's big Colne fish. We've seen his big Thames fish, which was a 20-pounder, ridiculous. But this thing, I said to you before, Gary, the frame on this fish is outrageous. Like for me,
it's a big frame fish. This one,
I mean, was this a fish that you knew about?
I'd heard there's supposed to be a 16 caught out of that stretch a couple of years before. But it's a bit no one really fishes.
Okay.
It's sort of partly for HS2, but it's sort of become overgrown and
Was it a stretch of river that you knew from your?
I've been fishing
younger
it for
days,
years
have
on
you?
and off.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they've just suddenly got bigger.
Like in a lot of rivers, here you go. So, I mean, it's a different looking fish entirely to that Thames fish.
Yeah.
Nowhere near as sort of fat at the back end.
No. I mean, it was carrot. It
Huge
still
head
had
on it,
some
though.
weight, but it was yeah. It could go more. I mean, that was caught. I think that was in December sort of time, the year before last. So yeah.
But again, around the sort of time of year when perhaps we're all a little bit in the doldrums in the carp world, certainly on the first cold bit,
Yeah. It's never that.
and you
good
can
that
still get
time
out
of year.
and to be honest, the bites are savage, aren't they? They're great. Are you a sort of watch the isotopes job, or do you have alarms? Like what's
Depends how long if I'm just fishing for a few hours, I'll watch the tip. Yeah, sit next to the rod or even hold the rod.
yeah? Holding. Will you sort of feel for them?
More just something to do. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
You know when you got a bite off of them, but
And-
I mean that was just a couple of hours. That would have been just like fishing for a few hours
Okay.
after work.
In a swim that you thought that it lived in, or
That was because it's so overgrown where I'm fishing.
Yeah.
There's not really many swims as such. I mean that, you sort of cut out your own pretty much.
okay.
And it was above head height when I went down there.
What made you think that this fish would be there in the area that you'd cut it out?
There's a deeper spot closer in, sort of slightly slacker area. Even if the river's tanking through, like up and carrying a load of rubbish, you can normally keep a rod there. So
Okay. And had you seen that in the summer or
previous seasons? Yeah,
Okay.
so I knew roughly where I was.
all right.
Yeah,
And it sounds to me like you went to that spot and stayed there, but I've heard, quite a few barbel lads like to give it 15, 20 minutes in a spot and then move and then do the same thing until they get some kind of signs.
I think it depends on the spots. I mean, I think you've got certain spots where the fish are resident, say the snags or something like that, or they're certainly resident for large parts of the sort of 24-hour period.
Yeah.
And you've got other spots where they move through, sort of travelling maybe between sets of snags. And if I'm in one of those spots where I think they move through, I'm quite happy to sit it out there because you've probably got new traffic coming through.
Yes.
If I'm fishing a snag where there might only be one fish, two fish in that spot, once you catch one, you've probably wrecked your chances in that swim and it's time to move on.
Okay.
So it does, yeah. I mean, that spot where I caught that one from, that's very much one where they move through. You can get a couple of fish in a...
So you think they're quite mobile on a given night?
Yeah, I'm sure they move a long way, yeah.
Yeah. And do you see stuff like otters coming through? I mean, has that affected the con as you've seen it?
I've
emerge?
not seen otters down there. I've heard things that could be otters, and I mean they're definitely in that area now. There's no doubt about that. There's sort of confirmed sightings, but and I mean some of the fish there as well. I don't know if it's otters, but they got tail damage, which whether it is otters or not.
I mean, it seemed like for a while that it was, barbel were going to be impacted particularly badly by otters, but it doesn't necessarily seem to be the death sentence that we thought.
I think it depends on the river. There's some rivers that they've done a lot. I mean, places like the Loddon, for instance, which I used to fish a bit. I mean, that I think you'd be lucky to go and catch a barbel now. Even the Kennet, which again was really prolific. I mean, you look at sort of Benyons and some of those stretches.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago.
You're now looking at probably fewer but bigger barbel, and that probably is the case.
Yeah, it seems to be the case.
A lot of
yeah,
places.
yeah. I mean, part of the problem was that the rivers weren't that rich with fish stocks to start with, so any getting taken by otters makes a big impression.
This like perfect storm of crayfish eating the eggs and disturbing the kind of the spawn.
Yep.
Cormorants taking the juvenile fish and otters taking the fertile adult fish, which is like, that's tough, isn't it?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, for rivers that were low start, like the Ouse, I mean, that's when we're talking about where the record was, Adams Mill. I mean, there was probably maybe 30, 35 barbel lived in that stretch.
Was that fish actually killed by an otter, the Traveller?
I don't know
like
if it was. I can't remember. No, I'm not sure.
Okay.
It might have been. There was certainly some of the bigger fish were. But you don't have to take many fish out of 30, 35 fish to really make a dent in the population.
Okay.
Whereas you've got rivers like the River Wye, otters been there. They've been there for years.
They've never gone away, I don't think.
They never went away. It's one of the areas of the country where I think they've always been. But those rivers, they're very rich with, like, heavily stocked with barbel, or we've got high stock
Everything,
levels. Yeah.
Salmon coming through.
Yeah, salmon, and the otters just don't seem to do the damage there.
I think we're gonna look to wrap this up, Gary, because I think there's so much more we could talk about. I do want to sort of draw people's attention to the fact that there's a whole world out there, that doesn't begin and end with carp. Whereas obviously we're both passionate carp anglers, but you can do some other stuff as well.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
What would be your, like, if you've got one day to fish? I'm going to give you one day left, and what would you be? Where would you go, and what would you fish for?
UK or anywhere? Anywhere.
Actually, do both. Do as UK and then do as your global choice.
UK, probably on the Thames somewhere.
Why the Thames? What is it about that?
I just find it a really interesting river. You never know what's going to turn up on there. Somewhere I've spent a lot of time over the years. Always enjoyed fishing. A lot of free fishing as well.
Middle Thames? Are we talking Middle Thames? Above
probably,
London?
Probably lower. Yeah, down towards that bit, sort of from Windsor down towards London, anywhere along there. I mean, I quite like some of the sort of urban bits. It's sort of, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So Thames, and it would be what, static fishing? Some kind of like a couple of rods out for barbel?
Yeah, maybe a couple of rods out for barbel, yeah. Oh, it's hard. It's so hard choice, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean it's.
I love trotting on the test or something. That it's and then overseas, probably Marseille fishing.
Really?
Yeah.
Why Marseille? I mean, obviously these are almost like a spiritual obsession for people, aren't they? And are they in decline as well, Gary? These
massively in decline. I mean, it's quite a lot of infrastructure out there, like dams, hydroelectric dams, like blocking them off from spawning. Just the look of the fish as well. I mean, they're such an impressive looking
picture
fish.
Up there. I mean,
just
yeah. I mean, that's
to say nothing of the backdrop, mate.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. You got a little temple behind you, and that's right on the junction.
I don't imagine they fight very hard, do they?
That probably took about 300 yards when I hooked it.
Really?
Yeah, I hooked it right up the side river, and it went out into the just about into the main flow. Luckily stopped.
It looks like a painting.
Oh, yeah.
It just, incredible fish.
I will attempt to describe this, but this is like, it's like probably you'd have to say a mixture between a barbel and a carp in terms of the way it looks. His head is very carp-like. It's long and thin like a barbel. A huge, thick tail wrist, like a couple of bands of yellow run all the way down the fish, and the scales are like beer mats, aren't they?
Oh, they're massive scales, yeah, with those golden
looks like
edges,
armour plating, doesn't it?
It really does, yeah. Is that the Corvery, or is that...
No, that's right up in the north on the border with Nepal.
Okay.
That's, just one of the little side rivers that comes into the Kali River.
Okay. I mean... They live in the Ganges as well, don't they?
Yeah, I fish for them in the Ganges. Yeah, I've never caught one out of the Ganges.
There, or?
We had to raft down to get to.
Okay.
And that was fishing for them in a time of year when they're supposed to go up a side river and spawn and then come back.
Do the giants still exist?
They're still there, but it's just so difficult with timing. I mean, we went. The rains the monsoon had finished early. Water level had gone down. All the fish had already gone before we even had got there. So we're sort of gone all that way, and you're wasting your time. There's nothing there to fish for.
Right.
So it's but there are monsters still about.
What is a monster? What is a true? What would an earth-shattering Marseille look like to you?
I mean, that one there was 62, which I think is the biggest that's ever officially been weighed of that species.
Of that species,
yeah. Apparently, but I'm sure there's been bigger ones. There have been bigger ones caught. Like a lot of these IGFA records.
It's just what's reported.
It's just what people claim.
I mean, that's our culture as well, isn't it? It tends to be a fairly Western idea of what,
Yeah, and IGFA is like American as well. You got to join them to... I mean, I've had several fish over world record size.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean...
It's a hassle of trying to claim it.
The ones
that... there's been bigger ones caught anyway, so you're not...
And the ones that John Wilson was catching, did they go to 100 pounds? Yeah.
30 odd. That was caught back in the early 1900s.
Okay.
130.
It was a bit of a colonial pursuit initially, wasn't it?
Very much so. Yes,
Brits in
Victorian times.
Yeah.
And, out there fishing. They used to catch them a lot on the fly. Yeah. I mean, they still catch them on the fly.
Do they?
Yeah, I mean, that river...
What kind of patterns are we talking?
They'd just be using great big streamers, I imagine.
Because so they're predatory.
Yeah, very heavily.
Because I remember John was using raggy paste or like peeler crab. Was that?
Raggy paste they eat. I mean, those ones down in the south on the carvery, you catch them raggy. It's basically a millet flour. It's just powder, just mixed with water and boil it into big balls, and then.
I mean, it sounds crap, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah.
As a bait, but they obviously like it.
Yeah, I mean, you messed about with added extra flavours and bits and pieces when we were doing it. But they eat that, but they're very predatory as well. They eat fish, and again, crabs. So.
Okay. So are you bouncing these baits around?
In the rapids, you are sometimes with crabs, or you're fishing them like raggy balls. You're tending to fish static, like casting out, letting it come round until it settles behind a rock or almost snags itself.
This is exactly what John Wilson was doing 30 years ago, isn't it?
Yeah, there's not a lot to do
lead
different.
pinched on still, and just a hook, and
Yeah, I mean, I started using break-offs when I was out there. So if you did get snagged up,
like the sea lead, the breakaway type.
No, just on a weak link. So so you can snap it off.
So what is it about? I mean, I'm never going to go marcia fishing, Gary, but can you sort of boil it down for me? What about the country, about the landscape, about the fish itself? What are the things that make it the most magical fishing that you've done?
I mean, India I love anyway. It's like the chaos of the place. I love Indian food.
I've seen your cooking. Your curries look good as well.
I love Indian. Yeah. I mean, I've probably spent getting on for a year there in total if I added up all my trips that I've done there. Yeah. So I do love the country, the people. I mean, the fishing. The first run off of those fish when you hook them is just like nothing. There's nothing much else in fresh water that's gonna do that. Yeah.
What, they just go hard and then
they're so fast.
You've got to follow them. Yeah, they still use coracles.
Yeah, they do up down in the south, less so in the north, because I mean, where we were, it was like a gorge below, so you'd have been gone. Yeah, you definitely wouldn't be going in a boat there.
No, okay. Yeah. But you're hopping from rock to rock, are you? Or,
definitely across the rocks and that. Yeah,
it sounds like the most. I mean, the John Wilson stuff is out there on YouTube for anyone who wants to kind of catch a flavour of what it's like. And I guess we owe a lot of our inspirations to the likes of John.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
We'd all have first seen that on Go Fishing, wouldn't we, I guess?
Yeah, that was fishing. Years ago. It's got to be over 40 years ago.
I think in the 80s,
probably. Yeah. I'd have been young at the time.
Yeah.
It was that. It was Casting for Gold as well, which was Paul Boot and John Bailey.
I've never seen that.
No, that's quite good.
Is it?
That was on the Ganges, yeah. Yeah, that's quite worth a watch.
I mean,
very dated now, but it's still interesting sort of seeing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, but there may be a species that actually was better then.
I think it was, yeah. A lot of fish species have gone like that, though.
Right.
There's not many of these big fish in the world, anywhere in the world, where the fishing's getting better for them. Again, through pollution, like climate change. Just hydroelectric dams.
It does. With that in mind, it does feel a little bit like you're kind of Indiana Jones, like searching for these relics, and coming back with pictures.
Yeah, you're still sort of trying to find where you can still go and catch some of these things. Well, like with the Nile perch, they're so rare now. I mean, one time they were common.
Really?
I say the fact they were doing trips and didn't catch a big one, they give you give you a free trip on NASA and even Lake Victoria. That was full of them, and that's in Uganda, and they wiped that out very quickly commercially fishing.
Well, we're going to wrap this up now. So thank you so much for coming in and telling us, opening my eyes certainly to the diversity of fishing that's out there. I've got one more question. I think that is, where are you going next week?
Next week, probably pike fishing.
Yeah?
Yeah, up in Cambridgeshire, yeah.
In the Fens?
Fen Drayton. Big lake up there, yeah.
Nice. Well, hopefully you get a good one, mate.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for coming in, making the long journey across the corridor.
It's been great. Cheers,
Cheers, Gary. Nice
Cheers.
One. Cheers.
The Thinking Tackle Podcast.